Chapter 1137. I got it. I'll get rid of them all. The Empress looked into the distance with a cold look on her face. Be careful. The most troublesome ones aren't the herdsmen, but the jade-wasted slaves. Although they aren't strong, there are too many of them. Although 2 herdsmen died, there are still at least 150,000 jade-wasted slaves left. Otherwise, they wouldn't have suffered such heavy casualties. Rinpoche couldn't help but ask. He had a lot of faith in the Empress's strength. It shouldn't be a problem for her to sweep the 60,000 mountains if she was a level 2 Immortal Realm expert. However, she had to be careful of the various means of the foreign races, which were completely different from the human race. The herdsmen weren't strong, and even with the foreign races that were controlled, their numbers were still much lower than the human experts. However, there were hundreds of thousands of jade-wasted slaves. Although they were only at the manual level, they were extremely fast and small, and their attacks were overwhelming. If it weren't for Ma Hongyu's expertise in trapping, blocking, and large-scale attacks, the casualties would have been higher. Even Du Qian, who was ranked 10th in the world, had died. These were the top experts in the world. Less than 60 of them had condensed heaven-grade weapons and had the potential to open up the heavens and earth. Rinpoche's heart ached to see so many casualties. The Empress turned off the radio and walked out of her room. At this time, she was on a mountain in the 60,000 mountains. From the foot of the mountain to the top, there were rows of wooden buildings. Tens of thousands of soldiers were training at the foot of the mountain, and their battle cries shook the sky. This was the current location of the Protectorate of the South in Chuan City. Although it was called a city, it was actually just an extension of a village. Other than the soldiers, there are no civilians. The Protectorate of the South had a total of 30,000 soldiers, and the other 20,000 were scattered in the depths of the 60,000 mountains to clear out the beasts. Ask Fu Yao to come and see me. A moment later, a middle-aged man in leather armor with a longbow on his back came to the Empress. There was a layer of green scales on the armor that looked like it was made from the skin of a serpent. This man was the Deputy Protector General of the Protectorate of the South. Shi Wanya was in charge of clearing out the beasts in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. How many Cardinal Heaven-level experts are there in the mountains that haven't been transferred? The Empress asked coldly. There are 54 known people, Fu Yao said after some calculations. Ever since the Protectorate of the South had moved into the 60,000 mountains, Shi Wanya had ordered the mobilization of the experts from all over the world. Currently, there were 26 Cardinal Heaven Realm warriors under Qi Ziding and 11 in the Protectorate of the South. In the known villages, there were still 54 experts scattered all over the place who had not been summoned. There's still so many people. Has a conscription order been sent out? The Empress snorted. Yes. How arrogant and unruly. The Water Empress said casually. Her voice was calm, but her tone was filled with dissatisfaction. Send another order to them. They must arrive at Xuxia City within half a year. If they delay, they will be killed without mercy. I would like to see how much courage they have when I personally ask for it. The Empress said with a strong, murderous intent. She naturally knew that most of the Aboriginal experts were vicious and unruly by nature. The deeper they went, the more they were like this. If it was in the past, she wouldn't have bothered with them. However, now was the time to utilize manpower, and the expedition against the outsiders was imminent. If they still dared to rely on their strength to disregard the conscription order, then they could go to hell. Fu Yao cupped his fist at the Empress and said, Yes, I will inform Xuxia City immediately. Although Fu Yao hadn't personally seen those people in the past few years, he had heard a little about them and knew that these scattered experts were vicious. Not only did they not listen to orders, but they also spoke arrogantly. This made everyone in the Protectorate of the South extremely resentful of those people. Shi Wanya still had to preside over the purge and couldn't spare any time to deal with them. Now that the Empress had spoken, someone was definitely going to be out of luck. Fu Yao had a gloating smile on his face. After a while, Fu Yao sent a message to Xuxia City, and dozens of messenger birds flew to various military outposts. 2 months later, Rinpoche silently looked at the court officials who were engaged in a scuffle. "Look at my black tiger steals the heart." Tong Jingye's punch was as fast as lightning, but Qin Chuan wasn't slow at all. Tong Jingye tapped his foot on the ground and retreated 5 feet. However, his fist suddenly loosened, and 2 bird eggs flew out and smashed into Qin Chuan's body. A stench immediately filled the throne room. "Ha ha ha! No matter how cunning you are, you're no match for me." Tong Jingye looked up to the sky and laughed. Qin Chuan's face turned ashen. He went crazy from the smell on his body and started fighting with Tong Jingye again. Behind them, Minister of Revenue Tu Wan's groin kick was even more skillful than Qin Chuan's. Her claws moved up and down, and in no time, she had scratched Shui Yan's face. It was as if she had practiced the 9-in white bone claw. Speaking of which, the 9-in white bone claw wasn't necessarily comparable to Tu Wan's kung fu. The moves weren't exquisite, but they were extremely ruthless. In particular, the elusive groin kick made it impossible for Shui Yan to defend against it. The officials from the Ministry of War, Ministry of Works, Ministry of Justice, and Ministry of Revenue were also fighting. As for the officials from the Ministry of Rights and the Ministry of Appointments, they watched from afar and clapped and cheered from time to time. Great Elder Shiqing and Junior Elder Zhikohai had already hidden to one side. The newly promoted officials from the Ministry of Commerce and the Ministry of Education hid far away and trembled. Rinpoche took out a loudspeaker from his back and shouted, "Stop! Everyone stop!" A huge sound wave swept through the throne room, but everyone stuffed cloth strips into their ears and continued fighting. Rinpoche's face turned ashen. These bastards, the chaotic fighting in the throne room, made him so angry that he almost forgot why everyone was fighting in the first place. After thinking about it for a long time, he finally remembered that they had been expanding too much recently. Minister of Revenue Tu Wan complained that the National Treasury didn't have enough money, and Minister of Works Tong Jingye expressed his dissatisfaction that the Ministry of Works had produced so many craftsmen, but the profits from the Ministry of Commerce went to the Ministry of Revenue. Qin Chuan objected because he opposed Tong Jingye. Minister of Justice wanted money from Tu Wan. In any case, it was a mess. Needless to say, there was no need for the morning court session today, and it would end with another chaotic fight. This wasn't the first time such a situation had occurred. They were like this even when the Empress was around, let alone now that she was in the 60,000 mountains. "Go to hell, you bastards!" Rinpoche cursed and strode across the battlefield. Those who were supposed to fight fought, and those who were supposed to watch the show. Only a few people who were close to him grinned at him. As for Rinpoche's harsh words, if harsh words were useful, what was the use of fists? However, the moment Rinpoche stepped out of the throne room, he threw a small glass bottle containing a colorless liquid into the middle of the fight. A strange stench rushed straight to the head, and the stench that made people faint instantly filled the throne room as if they had been hit by a sledgehammer. F*CK, I will perish together with you. Rinpoche looked ruthless and didn't forget to shout, "Hexija, protect His Majesty." The throne room was filled with ghostly wails. Everyone couldn't care less about fighting and immediately jumped out of the throne room. However, the stench on their bodies traveled 150 kilometers with the wind. Even Xinja twitched her face and covered her nose as she distanced herself from the crowd. With one hand on the hilt of her sword, she glared at everyone and threatened, "None of you come over. I will kill anyone who comes over." Zhao Prince Consort. Everyone roared and almost vomited before they could finish shouting. They quickly fled back to their residences to take a bath and change their clothes. Rinpoche returned to the harem with a sneer on his face and put on a gas mask. He walked into the throne room and saw rows of 2-meter-tall cabinets that glowed red and blue. Several blonde men and women were making the final adjustments. A gust of wind blew, and the blonde men and women's expressions changed drastically. They covered their mouths and almost vomited. Rinpoche didn't care about their abnormalities and looked at the cabinets in the throne room with a smile. It took Rinpoche 3 months to bring back these cabinets from Earth. There were a total of 60 cabinets, 60 computing nodes, 240 processors, and 24 million computing cores with a peak operation rate of 3 billion times per second. Of course, the most important thing wasn't its computing capabilities, but that this supercomputer could support true artificial intelligence and store a large amount of information on Earth's technology, history, culture, and other aspects. With this supercomputer and a certain level of artificial intelligence, not only could it reduce Rinpoche's workload, but it could also calculate the best development route. Rinpoche had great expectations for this. Chapter 1138. Is it done? Why isn't there any response? Rinpoche looked at the computer expert from Earth. The artificial intelligence has been loaded into the supercomputer, but the newly loaded AI is like a blank piece of paper and needs a few minutes to learn the stored information. A Caucasian woman in her 30s said. They were a little frightened after waking up in this ancient country overnight. At first, they thought it was some kind of prank TV program, but a human head told them what was real. Rinpoche nodded slightly. After waiting for a few minutes, the center of the hall suddenly lit up and a row of Chinese characters appeared in the air. Do you want to understand the meaning of life? Do you want to truly live? Why Yesware no? Rinpoche was stunned for a moment, turned his head to look at them, and then looked at the words in the air. What's this? Maybe it's the initial activation program for this artificial intelligence? It's a little novel. Many employees like to play this kind of inexplicable game. It should start after you choose yes. A Caucasian man said with sweat on his head. Yes. Rinpoche didn't know whether to laugh or not. This joke had been around for 40 years, and it was really retro. As soon as Rinpoche finished speaking, a row of icons suddenly appeared in the air. Dragon Slaying Sword. Click to receive. Legendary mobile game. Dragon Slaying Records. How Ian Records. Great Ruler. Equipment Reliance. Sword the Archangel. Legendary Hegemony. Immortal Slaying. Proud Sword. Crouching Dragon's Cry. World of Divine Generals. 7 Heroes Hegemony. Fury of Thunder. And so on. Silence. The Caucasian men broke out in a cold sweat. Rinpoche's silent attitude made them feel as if a knife was placed on their necks. In the next second, their heads would be separated from their bodies like that unlucky fellow, and then they would be buried in the garden, using their own flesh and blood to irrigate those brilliant flowers. Is this artificial intelligence? Why do I feel like it's an artificial retard? Rinpoche didn't look too good. Just as Rinpoche finished speaking, the childish voice of a young girl suddenly sounded in the air. Are you my master? Along with the voice, the air flashed twice, and a young girl who was about 7 or 8 years old appeared. A real young girl, not a muscular young girl like Honeysuckle. He had golden hair, a young face, and a loose shirt that hung crookedly on his shoulders. Master means magician, right? Rinpoche looked at the young girl in the air and said thoughtfully. A long time ago, he seemed to have seen a setting related to this. Master means the controller, and it also represents the master. Are you my master? The young girl's eyes were very beautiful. Her eyes flickered with light like brilliant stars. Yes, Rinpoche said in a deep voice. Then, Master, do you like me? I created this image according to the aesthetic standards of hundreds of thousands of lollicons, satisfying the dreams of 90% of lollicons in the world. Remember to give me a like. The young girl suddenly blinked and looked at him expectantly. Rinpoche's face turned black. He increasingly felt that this was an artificial retard. I'm not a lolicon, Rinpoche said in a pained tone. That's because the lolas you met weren't cute enough. The young girl said, trying to act cute or stupid. For all, /. What's your name? Rinpoche rubbed his temples. My name is Loli. The young girl continued to play dumb. Rinpoche felt his balls aching again. He was sure that the person who created this AI was a pervert. He was obsessed with young girls. He was no longer a lolicon. He waved his hand at a few computer experts who didn't dare to raise their heads and said, You guys can leave first. Your job from now on is to maintain this supercomputer. If there is another job, I will let you know. Also, within half a year, All of you must pass level 6 in Chinese. I don't want my people to prepare translation earbuds for you before contacting you." When they heard the first half of the sentence, they felt as if they had been granted amnesty, but when they heard the last sentence, their faces were filled with despair. The bald man in front of him was a demon. After chasing them out, Rinpoche looked at the young girl in front of him and thought to himself, if only Erhua was this cute. At the very least, she looked quite cute, combining the aesthetics of hundreds of thousands of lilicons to create this image was truly a pain in the ass. "Have you mastered all the stored information?" Rinpoche asked in a deep voice. "I like gentle people. You could be gentler." The young girl continued to act dumb recklessly. "It's all in my brain. Those processors are my brain, and I still need some time to learn to fully master them. Let me talk about the situation here first." Rinpoche ignored her foolishness and roughly explained the situation in Dayo, in this world. "You should first formulate a development route with the highest priority." Rinpoche wanted to see the standard of this AI and see if it could understand the situation in this world. Then, he would formulate a suitable development plan based on his description. Loli wasn't surprised that this wasn't Earth because the original creator didn't consider the possibility of an AI being brought to another world. The AI didn't have much of a concept of this and didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. She just said in a unique young girl's voice, "I'm still young and need to think before answering Master." 10 seconds later, the young girl spoke again. "According to Master, the resources in this world are different from those on Earth. What Master needs the most is to understand the resources in this world and reformulate the development of technology based on the resources instead of looking for resources based on the technological development of Earth. According to Master, there's a type of vitality particle in the air of this world, which is one of the main resources in this world. However, Master doesn't know much about this type of vitality particle and doesn't know the impact it has on the same elements. Master, are you retarded?" The sudden venomous tongue in a childish tone made Rinpoche's face turn ashen in an instant. Rinpoche was silent for a while and knew that the AI was right. He had been neglecting the essentials all along and hadn't even figured out the foundation of this world. Instead, he was tirelessly developing technology according to his own ideas. He was completely moving the technology from Earth to this world and then modifying it according to the existing conditions. In a short period of time, the development was indeed very fast. However, this wasn't a technology developed based on this world, but a kind of grafting. Ignoring the characteristics of the basic substances in this world would inevitably lead to a bottleneck at a certain level. For example, he hadn't discovered oil yet. Although he already had diesel as fuel, oil was involved in all aspects of the industry. If he kept thinking of ways to modify it like before, he would sooner or later encounter a time when he couldn't find a substitute. Therefore, developing the characteristics of the resources in this world was the correct way to advance technology. Although he had previously sent people to look for various resources, his main goal was still to find the resources that he wanted to find and was less involved in other things. After hearing the words of the AI, Rinpoche understood the problem in a short period of time. His thinking had been limited. Or perhaps it could be said that he had been thinking about how to quickly advance technology to the level that he wanted to reach. He had gotten into a dead end and neglected too many things. "Understand. I'll make the arrangements now." Rinpoche nodded slightly. "Master is really receptive. I'm very happy to be able to provide you with valuable advice." The young girl smiled sweetly. "Continue learning the stored knowledge." Rinpoche nodded and turned to leave. Although he only asked about one thing, it was the most urgent matter at the moment. As for the rest, he could ask about it at any time and wasn't in a hurry. Furthermore, he had only described the general situation just now. He had to continue to input the overall situation that he knew so that the AI would have a more accurate understanding of the situation so that the suggestions it gave wouldn't be biased. This wasn't something that could be done in a day or two, so it couldn't be rushed. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1139. Master, do you want to see? If you really want to see and show enough gentleness, I can let you have a look. The young girl in the air pulled the corner of her white dress, raised it to her knees, and slowly raised it another inch. That young girl always had a naive smile on her face as she said all kinds of lewd things. Someone in the company that created this artificial intelligence was definitely a pervert. Rinpoche didn't know what he had inputted into her before it was activated. For the past few days, Rinpoche had been taking some time out to tell her about this world. This was to expand her database and increase her understanding of this world. During these few days, Lolita attempted Rinpoche almost every day. Rinpoche glanced at her and didn't feel anything. He wasn't obsessed with young girls. Even Lin Xiaola wasn't attractive to him when she was naked, let alone an illusory young girl. However, he didn't hate it. The reason was because she was good-looking. This artificial intelligence was indeed beautiful. Hua peeked at the door of the room. His father had been in this hall for the past few days, and he didn't know what he was doing. What he saw was a young girl in a white dress slowly lifting the corner of her dress. "Father!" Hua immediately jumped in and shouted. He then looked sad and said, "Father, you have changed. You actually like this." Rinpoche turned his head and suddenly felt pain in his balls. Looking at Zhu Hua, who also popped out, Rinpoche felt that this melodramatic plot was unfolding. He slapped Hua's head and asked, "What do you know? Where did you learn it from?" "I saw a big sister say that to Brother Rin Xia the other day, and then? You learned it?" "Then Brother Rin Xia treated me and my big sister to a lot of ice cream." "You didn't learn anything good." Rinpoche slapped him again. Hua was a little depressed. That big sister obviously succeeded, but he failed. Then he asked curiously, "Father, who is this?" "Artificial intelligence. You can call her Lolita." Rinpoche turned his head and looked behind him. Lolita was looking at Hua curiously. "Oh, I'm Chi-Yuching. You can call me Daddy," Honeysuckle said to the lowly seriously. Rinpoche wanted a facepalm. Such a good daughter seemed to have been raised in the wrong way. For a moment, Lolita was dumbfounded. She did not understand what was going on. Then he said in a serious voice, "In biology, children have pairs of chromosomes in their somatic cells. The Y chromosome is a genome segment that is strictly passed down from father to son. Males with the same surname should have the same or similar Y chromosome type. Stable SNP mutations on the Y chromosome could be passed down in the offspring of the paternal line forever, and a reliable paternal gene lineage could be constructed. Male children call males father. According to my scan, you are a female, so you should be called mom." And according to human language habits, this kind of situation is usually referred to as great aunt. "My fist is big. Call me daddy, or I'll beat you up." Honeysuckle extended his fist and threatened. Then, his face turned serious. "If I punch you, you might shit your pants." Rinpoche couldn't bear it any longer. He grabbed Lu Hua by the neck and dragged him back to his quarters. He picked up the metal rod and gave Lu Hua's buttocks a good beating. With an ashen face, he roared, "Where did you learn this from? Who did you learn it from? Do you treat the etiquette lessons you learn in the palace as food? You only know how to fight every day, snatch people's lunch, toys, and money. Do you think I don't know what you did in kindergarten?" After the time it took to burn a stick of incense, Lu Hua lowered her head and smiled mischievously. When she raised her head, she pretended to be in pain and had tears in her eyes. Rinpoche was so angry that his liver hurt. She was only 4.5 years old. He thought she was a little girl, but she turned out to be a troublemaker. He really didn't know how she grew up to be like this. After the beating, Lu Hua asked Rinpoche as if nothing had happened, "Father, can I go and play with that Lolita?" "No." Rinpoche looked fierce. She was already a troublemaker. If she learned from that artificial retard, she would be done for in the future. The Empress would beat her to death when she returned. While Lu Hua was being beaten, a skinny and small boy in coarse clothes was carrying a basket along the street to pick up the rubbish. His clothes were very cheap and had been washed white, but there weren't many stains other than the dust on his body. The boy's name was Fuji. His hands were very dirty, and his nails had turned black. However, he rolled up his sleeves to his elbows and tried not to get any dirt on his clothes. Although his clothes were very coarse, they didn't have layers of patches. This was his most precious piece of clothing. This piece of clothing represented that he was no longer a beggar, but a person who relied on his own hands to support himself. His clothes were the uniform of a cleaner in the city, and his identity was that of a cleaner in the capital. As he was skinny and small, he couldn't do too much heavy work. His main job was to pick up rubbish. With his age and status, it was impossible for him to find such a job unless he met a benefactor. Even if he didn't starve to death or get beaten to death, he might die of a minor illness somewhere. Perhaps only Xiaoyu and a few others would be sad for a few days. Therefore, he cherished this job that allowed him to make a living and was very serious. At the same time, he didn't want to embarrass Big Sister. Big Sister was the Princess of Dayo. She was the one who asked him to come here, so he couldn't embarrass her no matter what. Fuji picked up 2 fruit pits and threw them into the basket. He straightened his back, which was aching from bending over for a long time, and planned to buy some medicine when he returned. He wasn't going to pick up vegetables today. Instead, he would buy half a caddy of beef and stew a pot of fragrant beef stew with potatoes. Xiaoyu was sick and hadn't been able to get out of bed for the past 2 days. She was a 7-year-old girl, 3 years younger than him. His previous experience of working hard to survive had made him treat Xiaoyu like a younger sister. In addition to Xiaoyu, there were 3 other children who were about the same age as him and Xiaoyu, and they were all Big Sister's first batch of younger brothers. After daydreaming about the fragrant beef stew with potatoes that night, Fuji felt that his back wasn't hurting so much anymore, and he was immediately full of energy again. After walking a short distance, Fuji let out a soft cry of surprise and picked up a piece of golden metal the size of a baby's fist from the corner. "Is this gold?" Fuji opened his mouth wide and carefully looked at the shiny, irregular piece of metal in his hand. Other than the shape, it was similar to the golden leaf that the young master had given away in the Yun Nation. In fact, this was just a piece of yellow iron, useless trash that a craftsman from the Ministry of Works had casually thrown away. That craftsman had also found this piece of yellow iron in a pile of ore. He had thought it was gold and had taken it to a jewelry store to exchange for money, only to be pointed out that it was worthless and had been casually thrown away. In Fuji's opinion, this shiny golden color was definitely gold. Fuji was ecstatic. How much could such a large piece of gold be worth? How much meat could it eat? However, he soon became conflicted again. Who had dropped this piece of gold here? Would he come back for it? If he didn't find it when he came back, would he look for him? He wasn't a thief. He had picked it up. In the past, he would definitely have hidden it secretly. But now, he had a job and could support himself. If this matter was known by Big Sister, it would be too embarrassing. Fuji stood there for a long time, hesitating. He first left and then walked back after a while. After repeating this a few times, he finally made up his mind. "I'll wait and see. If someone comes back for it, I'll return it to him," Fuji thought to himself. After all, it was such a large sum of money. No matter who had lost it, they would definitely look for it. However, the other party might not know where it was. If they didn't find it, then they couldn't blame him. Although Fuji had already decided to wait and return it to the original owner, he still had a little hope in his heart. However, no one came even after waiting until evening. "I can't wait anymore. If I wait any longer, I won't be able to buy beef. At most, I'll come back tomorrow. If the original owner doesn't come by tomorrow, this gold will be mine." At this thought, Fuji didn't delay any further. He carried the basket on his back and quickly ran to the gathering point to dump the trash. After washing it with water, he carried it again and quickly ran to the market. However, after 2 streets, he bumped into a group of people and fell. "Little bastard, are you blind?" The person he bumped into was a stout-looking man from the Yun Nation in his 50s. He had 2 guards with him. As soon as he turned the corner, Fuji bumped into him and caused him to fall to the ground. He immediately stomped his feet and cursed. When he saw Fuji's dirty hands, his face was filled with disgust. He kept cursing and repeatedly looked down to see if his clothes were dirty. I'm sorry." Fuji quickly got up and lowered his head to apologize. At the same time, he tightened the belt around his waist, which had become a little loose due to the run. The gold nugget, which was originally at his waist, also fell to the ground. Fuji quickly reached out to pick it up. When the man from the Yun Nation saw this, his expression changed. Greed rose in his heart, and he cursed angrily. "Thief, how dare you steal from me? You're courting death." "I didn't steal it. I picked it up." Fuji picked up the gold and hurriedly said, "Bullsh asterisk T. You clearly stole it from me, yet you say you picked it up? You're so young, yet your hands and feet are already dirty. I'm going to break your claws today." The man from the Yun Nation cursed. "Take him down and send him to see the officials." "Picked it up? Picked it up in my money bag? I was wondering why it bumped into me. It turned out to be premeditated. I've seen a lot of filthy people like you." This man wasn't a big shot, and people of status naturally wouldn't be interested in a piece of gold the size of a baby's fist. This man was just a small steward of the Yun Nation's Jiang Chamber of Commerce who had delivered a batch of goods to the capital a week ago. He had already made up his mind to label this kid as a thief. This kind of beggar-like character, he could do whatever he wanted with him. As for meeting the officials, if the other party was honest, he would spare him this time and just beat him up. Otherwise, it wouldn't matter even if he was sent to see the officials. One had to know that the Jiang Chamber of Commerce was backed by Sir Bai from the Public Order Department. As long as this relationship was revealed to the people from the Public Order Department, wouldn't it be a piece of cake to send such a little beggar to prison? As for who the gold belonged to, anyway, it wasn't this kid's. Who knew where he had stolen it from? So be it. I didn't steal anything from you. I picked up this gold, and you just wanted to snatch it. Fuji's neck stiffened. He was young, but he was good at reading people. He could tell what the other party wanted to do at a glance. Besides, he had the confidence, because his boss was the Princess of Dayo. If he didn't steal, no one could accuse him of stealing. However, his words made the other party furious. "You stole my gold, yet you dare to make a false accusation. Beat him up and break his hands. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1140. Where's my father? Honeysuckle rushed to Zichin Palace Hall, but found that her father was not back yet. "Your Highness." Qing Yuan, who just came out, bowed slightly and smiled. "The prince hasn't left the palace yet, so he might be a little late. Is there something you need from the prince?" "Forget it." Honeysuckle shook her head, turned around, and left with a vexed look on her face. Honeysuckle was troubled by one thing. She realized that she seemed to have lost weight over the past 2 days. Her muscles seemed to have shrunk a little. In order to confirm that it was not an illusion, she even weighed herself and found that she had indeed lost 0.5 kilogram. This made her very unhappy. One had to know that muscles represented strength, and strength represented everything. In kindergarten, no one could beat her. Why? Because they weren't as strong or fast as her. Her muscles had shrunk, which meant that her strength had decreased. Although there was no evidence of her strength decreasing, she firmly believed that this was the case. Smaller muscles equals smaller strength equals weaker. This was already a very serious matter, so she hurried to find her father, but he wasn't around. Father must have gone to the brothel again. Honeysuckle pondered in his heart. Ever since he was caught red-handed by the Empress, he had encountered his father several times in the lively and fun courtyard where there were beautiful ladies and people singing. Then, he got beaten up by the Empress. Getting beaten up didn't matter, but being punished to right was the most painful thing. Children's minds were always very active, and their thoughts were like airplanes. One moment they were here, and the next they were far away. They were more like dandelions that were blown by the wind, drifting with the wind, left and right. Honeysuckle quickly put aside the important matter she encountered and wondered if she should go and see the girl called Lolita. This was the first time she saw a child around her age in the palace. However, her father didn't allow her to play with her, never let her see her, or even get close to her. This made her feel like a cat was scratching her heart, and she wanted to see what was different about that Lolita. After taking a few steps, Honeysuckle suddenly changed her mind. I should go and see Xiaoyu and the rest. I haven't seen them for a few days. Honeysuckle cared a lot about her first batch of subordinates, especially the days when they begged together. Her life was filled with different memories. First, he went back to his palace and rummaged for a long time before he found a small handful of silver fragments. Most of them were silver beans, which added up to about 3 or 4 taels. That's right, these were the protection fees paid by the children at the kindergarten. You can choose not to hand it over, but if you don't, I'll beat you up. Of course, even though Erhua didn't do anything good, he wasn't a bad person either. He only focused on exploiting the children of the officials and ignored the children of the commoners. Of course, the children of commoners didn't have much to gain. The most honeysuckle could do was steal half of their meat during meals, which was considered a protection fee. From this point of view, Two Flower was quite principled. No matter if they were poor or rich, high or low, they would not let a single one of them go. Most of the time, snatching other people's meat didn't mean that she lacked that bit of food. It represented her position, the position of the boss. At least, that was what she thought in her little head. Now that you've paid the protection fee, I'll definitely stand up for you when something happens to you. It was the same for Little Fish and the others. He would take something they liked, such as a small wooden carving or some other strange and worthless thing. He would also share the money he stole with them, since he didn't have much to spend anyway. After evading the palace guards, Two Flower found an empty space to climb over the wall and leave the palace. He sprinted on the road, leaving afterimages in his wake. Little Fish lived in a residential building in the 4th Ring Road, which was directly allocated to the people who had moved here. The 5 children lived in 2 two-bedroom apartments, one in the middle and one on the left. Boss, something happened to Brother Fuji. As soon as Two Flower rushed to Little Fish's room, he heard another girl crying. The girl was only 9 years old and looked ordinary. She was also thin and small due to malnutrition, and her hair was dry and lusterless. Her name was Wild Bramble. It sounded nice, but it was actually the name of a type of weed, roughly equivalent to Gooden, Urgu, or Two Flower. Just like Little Fish, she didn't have a surname. As for Little Fish, he was lying on the straw mat on the ground with a pale face. He also looked worried, and only when he saw Two Flower did some color return to his face. He said anxiously, "Boss, save Fuji. If you're any slower, he'll be beaten to death." "What's wrong?" Two Flower was stunned. Following that, the 2 girls chattered nonstop, one after the other. They were young to begin with, and when they panicked, they couldn't speak clearly. It took Two Flower a long time to understand. Fuji didn't come back last night, which made them very worried. They spent a long time asking around before they heard from the people who were also cleaning up the city that he had been arrested and sent to the capital's security bureau. It was said that he had been dragged there, beaten until his head was bleeding and both his hands were broken. He was on his last breath. The person who had beaten him up and sent him to the authorities was a foreigner who didn't know the capital's laws. He had also been whipped 10 times and had to be carried back. Now, the other 2 boys had gone to the security bureau to find out. "Boss, Fuji definitely didn't steal anything. We can all support ourselves now, so he definitely wouldn't steal anything. He was framed." Wild Thorn cried. Two Flower's anger flared up when she heard that, and her little face turned red. She didn't care if Fuji had stolen anything or not. Someone had actually beaten her little brother up like that. "Where is the security bureau?" Two Flower ground her little canine teeth. "Boss, I'll take you there." Wild Thorn jumped up in a panic. There were 4 security bureaus and 1 security bureau in the capital. When the lanterns were lit, Two Flower rushed to the security bureau where Fuji had been arrested. Looking at the closed door in front of him, he smashed his fist into it, and a hole was smashed in the ironclad door. "Who dares to commit murder in the security bureau?" Someone in the security bureau immediately cursed, but before they could rush out, Two Flower kicked the middle of the door, and it crashed into the walls on both sides. Bastard, damn it. I'll beat you to death." Two Flower bared her fangs and brandished her claws as she rushed in, finally able to vent her anger. As she cursed, she directly knocked over 4 or 5 security bureau personnel who had stayed behind. Where did this girl come from? Alarmed by the commotion, a burly man jumped out and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Why aren't you stopping? You beat up an officer of the security bureau. Even if I put you in jail, your parents won't be able to say anything." The people from the security bureau had sharp eyes. Just by looking at Two Flowers' clothes, they knew that she wasn't an ordinary person. Furthermore, she had such strength at such a young age. Perhaps she was from the family of an important court official, so they weren't in a hurry to make a move. They would stop her first. Chapter 1141. Honeysuckle glared angrily at the man in front of him, ready to pounce on him at any moment. In this aspect, she was similar to the Empress. Both of them had explosive temperaments and would explode at the slightest provocation. However, no one dared to provoke her, and explosions were rare. But this time, someone had ignited the fuse. Foggy had been wrongly accused, and in her heart, it was as if she had been wrongly accused. Not to mention that Foggy had been beaten up so badly. If he hadn't happened to leave the palace today, Fuji might have been dead by the time he left the palace. Yi Jing and the other two children, who were leaning against the door, were frightened. Although they knew that Hua was a princess, it did not stop them from being afraid of the Public Order Division. These are two different things. "Boss, Foggy is still locked up inside," a youth shouted. The three of them didn't want to attract the attention of the Public Order Division. But in this situation, if they didn't warn their boss, he might really start fighting with them. Boss was a princess, so she would definitely be fine, but Foggy was still locked up inside. When Honeysuckle heard this, he remembered that the most important reason he had come was to fish Foggy out. He said hatefully, "Let Foggy out? He's the one you caught yesterday." The burly man was a little confused. The Public Security Bureau arrested a lot of people every day. And most importantly, who are you? Who are you? Who is Fuji? The burly man asked in a deep voice. "I'm Chi Yuching." Honeysuckle glared at the big man with his teeth clenched. Foggy is Foggy, so tall. He gestured casually, and then couldn't think of how to describe it. So he simply looked up. "Anyway, he's this tall. Let him out." Chi. The burly man was confused at first, but then he remembered something. His expression suddenly changed, and he carefully looked at Two Blossom in the night. Two Blossom was obviously wearing expensive clothes. Two Blossom was about 1 meters tall, and he looked about 10 years old. His small face was pretty, and if he looked carefully, he could vaguely see His Majesty's eyebrows. It was indeed the princess. The burly man thought to himself. He was glad that he didn't attack just now. He cupped his fists and bowed. "Greetings, Your Highness." When the others who had been knocked down heard that it was the princess, they immediately got up to pay their respects and obediently stood to the side. Originally, he was unhappy that he was beaten up by a little girl, but now that he knew it was the princess, he was happy in his heart. He was also beaten up by the princess. "Hurry up and let Fuji out," Honeysuckle roared. "Yes." The burly man did not hesitate and asked the others, "Did you catch a child this tall?" The princess was a child, and so were the few people who were hiding at the door. The princess compared their heights again. The person who was slightly shorter than the princess was naturally a child. They looked at each other, and then someone remembered, "I think we caught one yesterday." As he spoke, he glanced sideways at the princess. Seeing that the princess was glaring at him with a dark expression, as if she wanted to beat him up, he hurriedly added, "Actually, he wasn't captured. He was sent here by someone else. He stole someone else's things." "Foggy didn't steal anything. You've wrongly accused him." Honeysuckle was furious. "Princess, please calm down," the burly man hurriedly said. "Aren't you going to bring him out?" Not long after, he carried a half-grown child out from the back. The reason why he carried the child was because the child was covered in blood. His hands were drooping, and he looked like he was half dead. Wildthorn and the other two children immediately rushed over with a worried look. The burly man furrowed his brows. What happened? He was already like this when he was sent here. He was beaten by the person who sent him here. Who? Who dares to be so heavy-handed in the imperial capital? The burly man raised his eyebrows, and his expression was ugly. There were many aboriginals who fought, and it was common for them to be seriously injured. However, to beat a child to such a state was really unpleasant. His impression of the other party had already soured even before they met. It's someone from the Jiang family's Chamber of Commerce. The one who beat him was their guard, and he was whipped 10 times yesterday. The burly man nodded. According to the law, this was how it should be. Prepare a carriage and send him to the best medicine shop. After the burly man finished speaking, he turned to Honeysuckle and said, Princess, the child is here. Send him for treatment, and he should be fine. As for who was in the right and who was in the wrong, he couldn't be bothered to ask. In any case, the princess had already mentioned the person she wanted. The one who beat him also broke the law, and he was whipped 10 times. That was the end of the matter. However, Honeysuckle angrily questioned, Where's the person who beat him? Your Highness, he stole someone else's things, and the person who beat him has also been punished. The burly man refused to budge. I didn't steal anything. Foggy, who was on the verge of death, shouted out of nowhere and cried loudly, Boss, I didn't steal anything. I really didn't steal anything. He didn't steal anything. Honeysuckle's small face was fierce, and there seemed to be a murderous aura around her, shocking the burly man. Your Highness, how about we send him for treatment first, and then we'll pursue the matter later? The burly man said, Hurry up and send Foggy over. Boss, I picked up a piece of gold, and someone saw it. That person coveted the gold and said that I stole it from him. I didn't steal it. I waited the whole afternoon to see if anyone would go back to look for it. Foggy struggled and cried. His hands were weak, and he couldn't exert any strength. However, the other children didn't have much strength either, and they almost fell to the ground when he struggled. The people from the Public Order Division hurriedly stepped forward to steady him. Honeysuckle was furious when she heard this. Her anger seemed to be burning something in her body, making her feel uncomfortable and wanting to vent. Did you hear that? He didn't steal anything. Hand over the person who wronged him. The burly man turned his head and asked the man who had experienced the incident yesterday, What evidence does he have? The man immediately broke out in a sweat. When the burly man saw his appearance, he immediately understood something and said angrily, You dare to imprison him without evidence. You dare to let him go? The Jiang family steward said that this kid stole his gold, and the stolen goods are also here. The man stammered, Where did this beggar-like kid get the gold? Moreover, there were witnesses and material evidence, so he didn't think too much about it. But who would have thought that something big would happen? That kid actually knew the princess, and the princess even came knocking on his door. The burly man was furious and kicked him to the side. Take some people and bring the steward of the Jiang family's Chamber of Commerce here to confront him. We'll naturally know who's telling the truth and who's lying. After saying that, the burly man turned to Honeysuckle and cupped his fists. Your Highness, we'll know what happens later. If the Jiang family steward is telling the truth, please don't make things difficult for him, Your Highness. If the Jiang family knew that this burly man could speak like this to the princess, they would definitely be touched. The aboriginals were reckless by nature, but if they weren't, then they weren't. They rarely did those superficial things, and this could also be considered an advantage. Honeysuckle's anger subsided a little, mainly because her anger wasn't directed at the person in front of her. She said, Fuji wouldn't lie to me. The Jiang family's Chamber of Commerce's steward was surnamed Jiang Xian. He was a collateral descendant of the Jiang family. He wasn't very talented and didn't have any backing. After working for decades, he was only a small steward in the Chamber of Commerce. At this time, he was drinking with someone in a restaurant in the city. Apart from him, there were a few other members of the Jiang family, including a descendant of the Jiang family in the imperial capital and a shopkeeper of the local Chamber of Commerce. He didn't take to heart what happened yesterday. If that little beggar was in the Yun Nation, no one would do anything to him, even if he was beaten to death on the spot. Thus, he didn't expect to get into such big trouble. The Public Order Bureau first went to the Jiang family's residence in the imperial capital and hurried over after hearing about Jiang Xian's whereabouts. Jiang Xian was fawning over the Jiang family descendant. After all, the other party was a descendant of the imperial family and was much stronger than him. At this time, heavy footsteps came from the stairs. A few armed constables from the Public Order Bureau came up with gloomy expressions and headed straight for this table. The shopkeeper was considered a local tyrant. He got up and was interrupted halfway. The person pointed at Jiang Xian. You come with us. Jiang Xian got up with a puzzled expression and forced a smile. What exactly is the matter? His eyes scanned the faces of the newcomers and saw one of the constables he had seen yesterday. He was even more puzzled. Stop talking nonsense. Let's go. One of them said coldly. They all had gloomy expressions. Their attitudes weren't good mainly because the princess had come looking for them, and things had changed. However, they weren't sure who was telling the truth and who was lying. They didn't completely treat Jiang Xian as a criminal. Otherwise, they would just beat him up and drag him back. A young man in his 20s, sitting at the head of the table, stood up and smiled. I am Jiang Ning. I have also paid my respects to Master Whitestone. I wonder what crime Jiang Xian of the Jiang family has committed. Even if you want to arrest someone, you have to give an explanation? The faces of the constables were dark. It was because this Jiang family had some status and had connections with the head of the Public Order Bureau, Whitestone Eagle, that they believed his words yesterday and threw the kid into jail. Explanation? Humph. You know what happened yesterday. The constables ignored Jiang Ning and spoke directly to Jiang Xian. Come with me to confront him. Did that kid steal your gold? Or did you covet someone else's gold and falsely accuse him? Jiang Xian's heart jumped. A hint of panic flashed through his eyes. Then he straightened himself and forced a smile. Didn't you already find out what happened yesterday? Stop talking nonsense. Come with me to the Public Order Bureau to confront him. The constable's face was impatient. Jiang Xian was flustered. He didn't know what had gone wrong. Yesterday, it was clearly a little beggar who had been sent to jail. Why did you want to bring him to confront him today? Jiang Xian had lived for dozens of years and didn't have any great abilities. He could tell people's status at a glance and step on them. This was his instinct, and it was the way of survival for small fry. That was why he had been so daring yesterday. Now that he realized that something was wrong, he immediately began to panic. He forced himself to calm down and turned his head to smile at Jiang Ning. Seventh young master, a little thief stole something of mine yesterday. It seems that they want me to go to the Public Order Bureau to confront him. I'll go with them. Jiang Ning could naturally tell that something was wrong from the attitude of the constables. He looked at him and thought of something. Since there's nothing else, I'll go see what's going on. Jiang Xian was overjoyed. With Jiang Ning here, he felt much more at ease. He made up his mind that no matter what, he would insist that it was the little thief who stole his things. He had to figure out how to smooth things over and not give himself away. First, he had to set a small goal. For example, 1 second. Chapter 1142. Don't worry. If you didn't do anything wrong, everything will be fine. Jiang Ning patted Jiang Xian's shoulder. Nowadays, the laws of Dayo were becoming stricter and stricter, especially when there were conflicts between the aboriginals and other races. It might even reach the prince. Now, everyone knew that the prince was most concerned about this matter. Thank you for your company, seventh young master. This matter has already been resolved. I don't know if there were any twists and turns, but I didn't do anything wrong. I was punished for a small mistake, Jiang Xian said with a smile. He knew that he had to make sure of this. With the Jiang family supporting him, especially with seventh young master accompanying him, as long as he didn't make any mistakes, the other party might not be able to do anything to him. Furthermore, there might not be a mistake. Perhaps the Security Bureau suddenly wanted to ask about this matter. At the thought of this, Jiang Xian felt a little more at ease. That's for the best. Jiang Ning chuckled. Jiang Ning's previous words seemed to be comforting, but in fact had a different meaning. If there was nothing wrong, nothing would happen. If there was a mistake, then it would be hard to say. The people sent by the Jiang family to the capital naturally wouldn't be incompetent and wouldn't dare to be biased here. One had to know that this was the capital, where Qi Zixiao was in charge. Everyone knew about her fierce temperament. The Qin nation had sent several groups of envoys, killed them a few times, and had no choice but to send more. If she heard of any trouble, she might find an excuse to wipe out your entire family. If she said she would wipe out your entire family, she definitely wouldn't leave a single person alive. Not to mention the Empress, even the aboriginal commoners had fierce temperaments. Even if you were a commoner, if you dared to use your power to bully him, he might just fight you to the death. Unfortunately, the aboriginal commoners weren't weak. As long as they reached adulthood, they would have the strength of a man-wheel expert and an earth-wheel expert. They definitely had the strength to fight to the death. One had to know that it wasn't easy for these aristocratic families to recruit a few earth-wheel experts, let alone a spirit-wheel expert. Once they reached the spirit-wheel level, they would have to think of ways to curry favor with them. Therefore, in the territory of the imperial capital, no matter how arrogant and despotic you were in other places, no matter if you were from a major clan or a merchant association with great eyesight, you had to be well-behaved in this place. When the group arrived at the Public Security Bureau, they saw 2 chairs in the courtyard. A burly man sat in the middle, and a little girl about 10 years old sat on the chair behind him. She had delicate features, and she was glaring at them with anger in her eyes. Honeysuckle sat at the back so that he wouldn't steal the spotlight. Jiang Ning greets Lord Meng. How had you been? Jiang Ning stepped forward and greeted. The Public Order Division of the Imperial Capital was divided into 4 divisions. Each division had a division chief, left division and right division respectively. Xizheng Zhu judged cases, Sizu Zhu arrested people, and Siyu Zhu imprisoned people. If there was a major case, it would be sent to the Public Security Bureau of the Imperial Capital. The burly man's name was Meng Yu, and he was the head of the Public Security Bureau. When he saw Jiang Ning, his expression only softened slightly. The Jiang family had connections with Bai Shuriying, the head of the Public Security Bureau, so they had naturally come to visit Meng Yu. You're not involved in the case. Go to the side and wait, Meng Yu said in a low voice. Meng Yu said in a deep voice. He then turned his head to look at the slick-looking fatty in his 40s or 50s. Who are you? Are you the person involved in yesterday's theft? This lowly one is Jiang Xian, the steward of the Jiang Family Merchant Association. I was involved in yesterday's case. Jiang Xian felt a bit panicked when he stared at him. He felt like he was being stared at by some vicious beast, threatening and intimidating. Tell me the truth about what happened yesterday, Meng Yu said, staring at Jiang Xian. In reality, he was inclined to believe that the child called Fuji was telling the truth. After all, the princess had already wanted to take him away, and he'd said those tearful words before leaving. It seemed like he'd been wronged. If a 10-year-old child had really stolen something, he definitely wouldn't have behaved like that. Reporting to Lord, I was walking on the road yesterday when a little beggar suddenly bumped into me at a corner. That little beggar's hands and feet were fast, and he took a piece of gold from my waist. From his actions, it was obvious that he was a repeat offender. There are many thieves like him everywhere. Before Jiang Xian could finish speaking, Honeysuckle jumped up from her chair and scolded, Nonsense! Fuji didn't steal anything from you. If you keep spouting nonsense, I'll beat you to death. Jiang Xian jumped in fright at Honeysuckle's fierce scolding. She was terrified, but she continued to quibble. You know that thief? I experienced this personally, and there were other people who saw it. Otherwise, how could a little thief like that have gold? He could tell that this young girl actually knew that little beggar. This made him feel that things were not going well. It was obvious that this young girl had high status. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have been so greedy yesterday and caused so much trouble. He'd thought it was a small matter, but it had caused such a commotion and even provoked someone of status from the ancient clans to stand up for him. He was filled with regret, but now that things had come to this, he could only bite the bullet. Honeysuckle was infuriated when she saw that he was still quibbling. Her feet shook, and she wanted to rush up and punch him. As for whether she could survive a punch, she didn't even consider it. Your Highness, what did you say before? Before things are clear, does your Highness still want to silence me? Meng Yu turned around and punched Honeysuckle. He retreated more than 10 feet, a trace of anger on his face. Although he was angry, he was secretly delighted. Her Majesty's son was not even 5 years old, but he already had such strength. His talent was truly unparalleled. It was just that the princess was young and acted according to her likes and dislikes. Although his position was low, he couldn't let the princess act so wantonly. Honeysuckle pursed her lips and looked aggrieved. However, she felt that the other's words made sense. Aggrieved, she said, "You have to clear things up. You can't falsely accuse Fuji." Mengyu found it funny. The princess's strength was something that even he wasn't a match for. Her actions could be considered ostentatious, but she just had to put on an aggrieved expression at this time. It was hard to dislike her. After all, everyone knew that the princess was not even 5 years old. As the two of them spoke, Jiang Ning and Jiang Xian jumped in fright. Jiang Ning had thought of Honeysuckle's identity from the words, "Your Highness." As for Jiang Xian, she was frightened by Honeysuckle's furious appearance. Although the tiger cub was small, it was ferocious, especially when their fists had collided. That ferocious-looking lord had been knocked back several meters. If no one had stopped her, that young girl would probably have beaten him to death. Mengyu saw Honeysuckle reluctantly return to his chair. He turned his head and said, "Are you speaking the truth? Every word this lowly one says is the truth. There is not a single lie. Where is the stolen goods?" Jiang Xian hurriedly took out the gold from the pouch. Mengyu smiled faintly. "Since you have a pouch, why did you put the gold at your waist yesterday?" Jiang Xian hurriedly said, "Let my lord know that this lowly one is here to deliver some goods. Before I set off, someone asked this lowly one to deliver something. Yesterday, I gave the item to that person, and this gold was my reward. This lowly one conveniently put it at my waist." Before coming here, he had already thought of an excuse. Although there were many flaws in his words, he couldn't care less. "What kind of person asked you to deliver something? To where? Who?" Mengyu asked repeatedly. "This gold isn't gold ingots, but ore. Do you know how pure it is? How much gold can you offer? How much is your reward?" The person who asked me to deliver the goods covered his face and didn't say where to deliver it. He only said that someone would come to collect it after it was delivered. The sound was extremely loud. After the 2 slaps, Jiang Xian lost most of his teeth. His face was swollen like a pig's head, and he fainted. "The two of you better think carefully before you answer. If you lie again, I will definitely let you know the consequences of deceiving me," Mengyu said irritably. He was already thinking about how to punish the 3 of them. Previously, he had only used words to ask questions in front of the princess. If it were any other time, he would have already given them a round of torture, and then he would be able to get anything out of them. Even though his words to the princess just now were reasonable, he wasn't much better than the princess when it came to handling matters. It was just that his thoughts were usually more transparent than others. However, it was really difficult for him to solve the case by questioning. He had wanted to show his face, but now he was in a difficult position. Even now, the princess was restraining her temper and watching. Mengyu began to feel resentment. That Jiang Xian had pushed all the blame away. Even though he had smuggled goods, and the movements of the person who had collected the goods were secretive, it was likely that he was up to no good. Mengyu could make some trouble for him on this point, but that would be embarrassing. "What happened yesterday? The 2 of you, speak truthfully. Do not lie," Jiang Ning said from the side. He was prepared to abandon Jiang Xian. If Jiang Xian was innocent, they would be fine. But if he had stirred up trouble and broken the law, then he could not be left alive. If Jiang Xian escaped today, the princess would most likely hate the Jiang clan, and there would be a lot of trouble in the future. The 2 guards looked at Jiang Ning. They knew his identity and misunderstood. Gritting their teeth, they said, "What the 2 of us have said is not false. Everything we say is the truth." In their view, the young master of the Jiang clan would naturally stand on the side of the Jiang clan and protect Jiang Xian. Jiang Ning glanced at the 2 of them, then raised his hands to Mengyu. "Sir, I won't disturb you any longer." After Mengyu agreed, he swaggered out. It wasn't that he didn't pay attention to them, but that there was no benefit in staying here any longer. It was easy for people to think that he was supporting Jiang Xian and the other 2. Now, he should remove himself from this matter as soon as possible. "Guards, take the 3 of them to prison first. Fuji will confront them tomorrow," Mengyu immediately said. He turned to Erhua and said, "Princess, these 3 people insist that Fuji is the thief. Let Fuji confront them tomorrow." I will definitely get to the bottom of this. Erhua wasn't easy to fool. She seemed to see that he had no other way and curled her lips. Useless. This made Meng Yu's face turn black, but he couldn't refute her. After all, it had started strong but ended weak. After Erhua left, Meng Yu thought about it. No matter what, he couldn't do this tomorrow. Those 3 people were stubborn, so he pried them open. Erhua went to see Fuji through the few taels of silver he had to them, and then made an appointment before sneaking back to the palace. Early the next morning, the events of the night were laid out on Ren Baqian's desk. Ren Baqian smiled after flipping through it. He was a little gratified that Erhua had managed to hold back her temper. It seemed like this child knew her limits. As for the truth of this matter, he didn't care at all. However, the people from the Jiang family were a little too bold. If these aristocratic families acted like this in the capital, they would be even more unscrupulous in other places. Were these aristocratic families from the Yun nation finally unable to restrain their old ways after climbing up to the important officials of the imperial court? Ren Baqian had to find an opportunity to teach them a lesson and kill a few chickens for them to see. Knowing that Erhua would sneak out again today, he simply didn't care about her. In the afternoon, Erhua slipped out of the kindergarten. She first went to find Fuji and the others, and then they went to the security bureau together. Unexpectedly, when Meng Yu saw her, he immediately said, "Your Highness, those 3 people were in the prison yesterday, regretting their crimes, and confessed. It was indeed that Jiang Xian who coveted Fuji's gold. That's why the subsequent events happened." Erhua was overjoyed when she heard this. "I knew it. Fuji definitely didn't steal anything." After proving that she was right, Erhua was quite excited. Fuji and the others were also excited when they heard this. It was just that they didn't know why they confessed after one night. After the excitement, Erhua's expression changed. Her face was cold and stern, and she looked 80% like the Empress. Since they confessed, they broke Fuji's hands. I want to break their hands too. Also, you guys arrested Fuji and threw him in prison without asking the right and wrong. You guys are also guilty. Meng Yu had a headache when he heard this. Those 3 people were easy to deal with, but the others were going to be in trouble today. However, this was indeed the case. He had already gotten the truth from those 3 people last night, so the princess couldn't be blamed. 30 lashes for each person who broke their hands the day before yesterday. Meng Yu said directly, "As for those 3 people, you don't have to do it yourself." "No, I want to break their hands myself," Erhua said loudly. Seeing that Meng Yu was in a dilemma, Erhua asked suspiciously, "Don't tell me you let those 3 people go? If that's the case, I will definitely report this to my father." Meng Yu smiled bitterly and waved his hand. "Bring those 3 people in." After a while, the 3 people were pushed in staggering. Fuji and the others were shocked when they saw them. They were covered in wounds and blood, and it was difficult for them to walk. When they were pushed in, they knelt on the ground with their arms hanging limply by their sides. They didn't know if they were broken, but their eyes were filled with fear and despair. They looked much worse than Fuji. Jiang Xian knocked his head on the ground and cried, "I deserve to die. I was blinded and actually framed you. I deserve to die 1,000 times." Erhua was shocked at first. Then he scolded the 3 people, "You deserve it." However, seeing their pitiful appearance, he didn't have the thought of breaking their hands. He glanced at Meng Yu and said, "Confessing under torture. You are indeed useless." However, Meng Yu's face immediately darkened and he felt wronged. Yesterday, he must have been out of his mind to have interrogated the princess to solve the case. Nowadays, it was normal for him to solve cases like this. If word got out that he was judged as useless by the princess, he would be too ashamed to face anyone. Also, didn't you use the phrase confessing under torture incorrectly? Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 1143. Jiang Ning managed to escape in time and handled the matter appropriately, blocking Ren Baqian's way of making an example out of the Jiang family. This made Rinpochian take a second look at them. Among the many aristocratic families, the Jiang family was considered relatively stable. Although there were some domineering people, they were generally well-behaved and didn't reach the point of causing public indignation. However, there were a few aristocratic families who felt that they were relying on the important officials of the court and had a relapse, causing many complaints. Although they relied on their power to cover up, how could they escape the eyes of the rearguard commandery? Instead, he recorded all the crimes he had committed. 2 days later, Rinpochian threw the crimes of these families in front of the court officials. Among them, 2 were clinging to Qin Chuan, while the other was clinging to Gu Yu, the imperial treasurer. It's just the people of the Yun nation bullying the people of the Yun nation. Qin Chuan understood the whole story and stroked his beard indifferently. The people of the Yun nation are also your majesty's subjects. They colluded with the prefectural army, acted unscrupulously, and disregarded the law. If we let them do this, how can we govern the country? Rinpochian snorted. Qin Chuan didn't say much after hearing this. These people were only helping them earn some money, and many of the officials still didn't think much of them. The officials in the court hadn't been infected with extravagant habits. Although they liked money, they wouldn't go to war over it. It was just that Rinpochian had targeted the 2 aristocratic families that were attached to Qin Chuan, which made him somewhat embarrassed. However, these aristocratic families were under Rinpochian's instructions, so he couldn't speak out against it. He wondered if he should simply make a scene and mess up today's court meeting. In any case, he was also a troublemaker. This matter was done with ease, and no one could do anything to him. Rinpochian knew what he was thinking and raised his voice. These aristocratic families use your reputation when they travel outside. If they commit crimes, you will be despised and hated by the people of the world. The gains don't make up for the losses, so you have to control them more in the future. Moreover, the law of the country is always like this. Otherwise, how can the people of the world be governed? The evidence of these 3 families is conclusive. Sir Baishur, you have to take action against the Public Order Bureau. Qin Chuan knew that it was useless to make a scene and felt somewhat depressed. Another 2 months passed, and the time limit of half a year set by the Empress was up. The Empress led everyone to Chu Xiaqing. A city built in the mountains would naturally not be very big. It would be difficult to provide for even tens of thousands of people. Each of them was unbearably rough, but their bodies were full of vigor and exuded a murderous aura. As they walked, they looked around without the slightest hint of respect. After all, Cardinal Heaven experts were powerful enough to occupy a piece of land even in the 60,000 mountains. They were revered by others and had extremely high aspirations. In addition, they had fought for their lives in the mountains since they were young and had experienced countless killings. They were fierce, aggressive, and bloodthirsty. Even though they were here on the orders of the Empress, they were only abiding by the agreement that they had signed decades ago. However, they didn't care much about it. It was absolutely impossible for them to obey a single holy scroll. Even though they were here, it wasn't easy for the Empress to mobilize them. However, when they saw the Empress in front of them, their carefree expressions immediately changed, and they stared at her with bewilderment. Has no one taught you the etiquette you should have when you see me? The Empress looked down and snorted. The Empress's vigor was surging like a furnace. Even those who were more than 30 meters away could feel the blood in their bodies churning and being triggered by the Empress's vigor. Like a tide, it surged endlessly. The aura around her was as deep as the sea, covering the sky and shrouding everyone. Everyone's expression immediately changed. That aura pressed down on them like the weight of a mountain and the moon, causing them to immediately lower their bodies. Shiwanya suppressed the surging vigor in his body and sighed in his heart. He had long heard that the Empress had broken through, but he didn't expect her strength to improve to such an extent. It was already difficult for him to keep up with her. Just by activating her vigor and using her aura to suppress others, she was able to subdue these unruly villains in one fell swoop. The Empress's aura was withdrawn upon contact, like a whale swallowing, and the surging vigor in her body also calmed down. However, The villains all tensed up. Although the Empress hadn't made a move, the strength she had displayed just now was far superior to everyone else's. The Aboriginals respected strength, and the strength displayed by the Empress was enough to make them not dare to act rashly. Which step did your Majesty break through and reach the level of the late Emperor? A villainous man with long, messy hair, a hideous tattoo on his chest, and a bone necklace hanging around his neck couldn't help but ask. Everyone's eyes flickered. Although they had guessed it, they still wanted to hear the Empress's confirmation. As for the late Emperor they were talking about, he was the first Emperor of Dayo. Back then, Yapong had pulled out an army from a village in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. After establishing the country, he led the elite soldiers into the 60,000 mountains and disappeared without a trace. Cardinal Heaven experts had a lifespan of 200 years, and many of these people had seen Yapong. At this moment, they realized that the feeling of oppression that the Empress gave them was no less than the feeling that Yapong gave them when he came back. Although they had improved a lot over the years, the Empress had the strength of an intermediate longevity Heaven expert after breaking through. She was stronger than Yapong when he brought his army here. The Empress snorted and said, "In the future, you will listen to my orders and must not disobey me. If you disobey me, I will not spare you. If you do well, I will not be stingy with rewards. As for my strength, you will naturally know in the future." Everyone's expression changed a few times. They looked at each other and bowed their heads in agreement. Since the girl in front of them was so powerful that it was enough to suppress everyone, and she was also the ruler of the Aboriginals, everyone naturally obeyed her orders. Seeing this, the Empress nodded and said, "You may leave first. There will be a banquet in the residence to entertain everyone. Tomorrow, you'll have to go and do some things." That night, many Aboriginal villains, Mahong Yu, and other experts attended the banquet. Together with the people from the Temple of Heaven, the three parties almost had another conflict. However, under the suppression of the Empress, nothing happened in the end. The next day, the Empress called for 22 villains and divided them into teams of 2. They were divided into 11 teams and went to the 11 positions that the Empress had selected. They were going to directly attack those future villains. If they bend their heads and surrender, I can spare their lives. If they resist, kill them on the spot. Shiwanya mobilized 11 teams of 100 people to follow them and lead the way, the Empress said in a deep voice. These experts and villains were even more familiar with the surroundings than Shiwanya soldiers. However, the Empress clearly made it clear that these soldiers were going to monitor them. Let someone slack off and let those people escape. Chapter 1144. 7 or 8 days later, at a place called Heading Cliff in the 60,000 mountains, there was a village at the foot of the mountain with about 7,000 to 8,000 people. It could be considered a large village with a radius of hundreds of kilometers. The village was called Birdbone Village. Outside the village walls were the bones of ferocious beasts that were as white as jade. Even though they had been dead for many years, they still exuded a fierce aura that deterred ordinary beasts from approaching. A huge bird head hung above the village gate. Just the head alone was the size of 2 houses. It was incomparably huge and had countless sharp teeth in its mouth. It looked extremely ferocious. At this moment, a man and a woman came to the village. The man had a fierce face and messy hair. He was tall and strong with a 3-tailed, poisonous scorpion tattooed on his body. The woman's face was beautiful, her figure was graceful, and her skin was bronze. However, her entire body exuded a bloody and vicious aura. From her neck to her chest, there was a flower embroidered on her animal skin. However, the flower was also full of sharp teeth, like a sunflower, layer upon layer. When they arrived, they did not enter the village. Instead, they stimulated their chi and blood, and their auras shot up into the sky like 2 pillars of smoke. Behind them, there was a group of 100 soldiers following them from a distance. As they released their auras, Countless people were alarmed and jumped onto the village walls that were more than 3 meters high. At the same time, a fierce aura shot up into the sky from within the village. A figure first leaped tens of meters high before crashing to the ground and appearing in front of them. Xian Shou, Zhu Puhua, you too want to see the young emperor. What are you doing here? The burly man shouted after identifying the two. We came here because we saw the young emperor. The young emperor has ordered us to bring you to see her. You should come with us. The young emperor has already passed that level and is now at the same level as the late emperor. It will be easy for him to kill us, Zhu Puhua said. Bah, I'm comfortable here. Why would I go to see her? It's your business if you want to listen to her, but if you want to bring me there, then we'll have to fight. It just so happens that I've wanted to test your skills for a long time. It's just that I was too far away in the past. I've only heard of your reputation and haven't had the chance to fight. When the burly man heard that the Empress had reached the longevity heaven realm, his expression changed, and then he became somewhat disapproving. So what if she has reached the longevity heaven realm? You want me to listen to your orders just by sending a random person? The little emperor said that if there is any resistance, kill without mercy. Bo Bai, if you want to make a move, you better think about the consequences. The man called Xian Shou said with an unfriendly expression. These aboriginals living in the depths of the 60,000 mountains had fought for many years. Not only were they not afraid of fighting, but they also liked to fight. If they didn't know each other, they would usually fight first. Bo Bai's expression changed as a vicious aura surged from his body. Then let's see if you can take my life. It just so happens that I've also heard of Bo Bai's fierce reputation. I've long wanted to see if it's really as the rumors say. Xian Shou twisted his neck and raised the irregular metal rod in his hand with a sinister expression. The reason why it was said to be irregular was because the rod was made from a bunch of metals that had been forcefully melted together, but it had not completely melted into a ball. Thus, the surface of the rod was covered in ridges. If it could withstand a strike, it would increase its lethality by quite a bit. In Bo Bai's hand was a huge leg bone. It was about 2 meters long, about the same length as a metal rod, and as white as jade. Both sides had ferocious expressions on their faces, and without saying a word, they crashed into each other. There was a loud bang in the air, and the soil on the ground flew everywhere. Everyone could barely see two figures fighting as they chased each other toward the nearby Hidinya. Zhu Puhua pondered for a moment, then followed the two of them. The two of them fought for a long time. In the end, Xian Shou was not as strong as Bo Bai. He was struck by the rod, and half of his body was deformed. Bo Bai had also expended most of his energy. His internal organs had long been injured, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. However, he still had the ability to fight. Just as he was about to give chase, his expression suddenly changed, and he leaned back. A cold light streaked across his chest, almost cutting his abdomen open. Zhu Puhua was holding a strange weapon in her hand. It was actually the toe of a bird's claw. After being processed, it was extremely sharp, and she used it as a short knife. Bo Bai's expression changed drastically. He only felt that his wound was numb, but he didn't feel any pain at all. The blood on his wound had turned dark green, and there was a rancid smell to it. Zhu Puhua didn't approach Bo Bai anymore after hitting him with one strike. She just stared coldly at him. Bo Bai was indeed powerful. He had also entered the advanced stage of the Cardinal Heaven realm. It was no wonder that he was so brave and didn't listen to the little emperor's orders. If he hadn't fought with Xian Shou just now and wanted to kill Xian Shou wholeheartedly, he wouldn't have been able to sneak up on him and succeed in his sneak attack. Bo Bai's body shook, and he gave Zhu Puhua a sinister smile. He reached for his chest and dug out all the flesh that had been cut open. Originally, his abdomen had almost been cut open. Now that he had pulled, even his internal organs were exposed. However, he did not care at all. That was all he could do. Zhu Puhua moved like lightning and circled around Bo Bai. Bo Bai, who was seriously injured, didn't have the strength to resist, and his head fell directly. She hung Bo Bai's head on her waist and turned to look at Xian Shou. Her eyes flickered. Both of them had a grudge against each other. If she hadn't obeyed the little emperor's orders, she would have taken advantage of his illness and taken his head. However, she gave up on this idea in the end. She carried Xian Chao's body back and threw it to the 100 elite soldiers. As for Niaogu village, they were in an uproar when they found out that Bo Bai had died. Hundreds of people rushed out to avenge him, but Zhu Puhua circled them twice before they fell to the ground and died. These 22 people were divided into 11 teams. The distance they traveled varied, and the Empress only received a full report a month later. This time, she killed a total of 8 people and only captured 3. 2 of the people she sent died as well. After learning about what happened to these 11 villages, the rest of the villains rushed to Chuxia City. In addition to the 3 people who were captured, the Empress punished them and assigned them to the criminal camp. In the future, when they fought against the foreign races, these 19 people would be the vanguard. They would fight to the death and would only return to their original identities if they didn't die in 3 battles. Under the pressure of the Empress's powerful strength, no matter how arrogant they were, they had no choice but to obey. Moreover, they weren't afraid of fighting. In addition, there were 6 people gathered together. The Empress personally went to them and killed them with a flip of her palm, shocking everyone who saw the Empress's power. From then on, no one dared to shirk the Empress's orders. As a result, the discovered aboriginal tribes were brought under the jurisdiction of the Protectorate of the South, and no one dared to disobey. If it weren't for the fact that it was difficult for the tribes to support too many soldiers, the Protectorate of the South would have more than doubled in size. The Protectorate of the South also took advantage of this to recruit hundreds of Kismet Heaven experts. Like the winged cavalry, they were considered the elites of the elites. In addition, the Empress also consulted Rinpochian about how to settle these Cardinal Heaven experts who were under her control. She would set up a martial arts hall and place these villains into it. They would be promoted based on their military exploits and wouldn't be able to command troops. However, they could use their military exploits to receive salaries in exchange for resources. After reorganizing the rear, the Empress set off with her people. Among them were more than 40 Aboriginal Cardinal Heaven experts, 20 from the Temple of Heaven, and 19 experts from Great Xia. There were a total of more than 80 people. In addition, there were 500 winged cavalry warriors, some people from the Medical Bureau, some people from the Imperial Kitchen, and some other odd job workers. A total of more than 600 people were heading to the depths of the 60,000 mountains to exterminate the foreign races. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1145. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. There were countless strange trees by a lake in the 60,000 mountains. They were ferocious and looked like monsters. Every night, countless fluorescent lights would dance in the strange forest, painting the forest with a layer of color. It was as beautiful as the Milky Way. However, the craggy shadows cast in the forest were even more sinister and strange. 7 or 8 humanoid toddlers of different ages were running. Their skin was green, and their ears were long and slanted. Their eyes were black crystals, and their fangs popped out of their mouths. From time to time, they would grab a jade-waisted slave with a beast face and a butterfly's body and stuff it into their mouths. Before the jade-waisted slave became an insect, its host was a human. After breaking out of its body, it had a human face. If the host was a beast, it had a beast face. Its wings were as hard as steel, but they could not resist the toddlers. They did not seem to have the desire of ordinary life forms to survive. A few adult herdsmen were not far away. Their skin was wrinkled, and they were nearing the end of their lifespans. The herdsmen would grow up here when they were young. When they became adults, they would erase all emotions and live in different places. When their lifespans were nearing the end, they would return to a burial ground and bury themselves. Only a few elders would stay here to take care of the toddlers. At this moment, a herdsman was looking at the toddlers with a cold gaze. Suddenly, his expression changed, and he appeared in the distance. At the same time, A huge rock broke through the air and smashed into the ground where he had been standing. Most of it had sunk into the soil. A few herdsmen elders looked up expressionlessly. They saw more than 10 burly men leaping from afar and landing in front of them. "You bugs are really hard to find." One of the burly men laughed sinisterly and waved the mace in his hand. "Kill them," another burly man roared. He tapped his foot and charged toward a herdsman elder. However, a person with a human body and legs that looked like entangled vines came out of the darkness and collided with the burly man. A few herdsman elders stretched out their arms, and countless jade-wasted slaves formed a river of light and surged toward the burly man. Just as the river of light was about to drown everyone, a flame ignited in the air. It covered a radius of nearly 300 meters and covered a large number of jade-wasted slaves. Chains appeared in the air and formed a large net, binding the herdsman elders. A few herdsmen twisted their bodies into extremely strange shapes and broke free from the layers of chains in the blink of an eye. However, at this moment, a mirror appeared behind one of the herders, and an arm stretched out from it. The herdsman was already retreating, but he didn't expect something like this to happen behind him. The arm instantly pierced through his chest. The men didn't care about the jade-wasted slaves that filled the sky. They jumped high into the air and pounced toward the remaining herdsmen. The chains enveloped the surroundings as if they were trapping the herdsmen and the men in an iron cage. In less than a dozen breaths, the 4 herder elders died one after another, leaving behind only the startled herder child. "Bring these little things back to Emperor Qi." Ma Hongyu walked out of the darkness step by step. Following the death of a few herdsmen elders, the jade-wasted slaves fell into chaos. Apart from a few who continued to attack, most of them started killing and devouring each other. A green-clothed, white-bearded old man stretched out his hand and pointed. Chains appeared out of thin air and tied up a few herder children. "Tengu, search the surroundings with Donghua's son. The rest of you, go to the place where they live and investigate." Ma Hongyu continued. In the darkness, many people followed her orders and headed in a certain direction. A beautiful lady in a blue dress walked out of the mirror in the air and cupped her fists at Ma Hongyu. In the shadow formed by the jade-wasted slaves and the strange wood, a figure crawled out. His entire body was as black as ink. Soon after, the ink faded, revealing a handsome young man with a frivolous expression. These 2 people looked young, but they were actually spirit wheel experts with long lifespans. Their real age was more than 50 or 60 years old. The earlier they attained the spirit wheel level, the younger they looked. After making arrangements for everyone, Ma Hongyu ignored the ferocious people in Dayo's martial arts hall. She walked to the mangled corpses of the herdsmen and remained silent for a moment. That day, they were ambushed by these herdsmen. Nearly half of the 30 experts were killed, and many of them were buried here. Now, it took them some time to find their lair and exterminate them. First, they could stabilize the rear and finally head to the boundary between the 2 realms. Secondly, he could also comfort those experts who had perished at the hands of the enemy. Although their friendship wasn't deep, they were all human experts, and most of them came from Great Xia. Compared to the aboriginals, they were naturally closer. For hours later, everyone returned to the top of the mountain where the Empress, more than 10 experts from the martial arts hall, and the people from the Temple of Heaven were waiting. 2 experts who were good at concealment and investigation had previously investigated the herdsman's hiding place. This elder was only here to raise children and wasn't dangerous. Therefore, he didn't have much protection. In fact, there were only 2 outsiders that were being controlled. One was the ginseng race, whose legs were like entangled vines, and the other was the giant arms race, whose arms were like pillars and whose hind limbs were relatively short. They ran on all 4s and moved very quickly. This time, they dispatched nearly half of their manpower and took them down without any trouble. The gathering place of these 2 races had already been destroyed a year ago, and this time they were also killed. In addition to the 5 herdsmen's children, there were many other discoveries, including the eggs of the jade-wasted slaves. They were crystal white and fist-sized. Every day, countless small, fish-like eggs would fall from them. After peeling off the outer layers of eggs, they discovered that there was a pink and tender piece of meat inside, which was amazing. As for this pink and tender piece of meat, everyone studied it for a few days and discovered that if it was placed near the jade-waisted slaves, a jade-waisted slave would attach itself to it every day. In just a moment, that jade-waisted slave would turn into ashes. Presumably, the jade-waisted slaves were also food for this piece of meat. Upon seeing this, the Empress asked someone to capture some live, jade-waisted slaves, that strange wood, and this piece of meat back to the capital. Now that most of the gathering places of the foreign races have been exterminated, the matter here is considered over. Next, we will head to the boundary between the two realms, the Empress instructed everyone. Everyone was excited when they heard this. The boundary between the two realms was extremely suitable for breakthroughs, and it was 100 times better than here. Li Fu and the others used the wall of the two realms to cultivate. In just 3 years, 2 of them had broken through to the realm of opening heaven and earth, and the rest had also made great progress. Everyone had been fascinated by this for a long time. A few hundred kilometers away from Chuxia City, a group of Kismet Heaven elites were lying in ambush on a cliff, draped in a net made of grass and leaves. Half of them were armed with longbows. After waiting for a full 2 hours, 2 soldiers each carried a giant egg that was half the size of a human and climbed up from the cliff. They threw the giant egg to the ground, and a fishy smell spread out. In less than an hour, 2 giant birds with a wingspan of more than 30 meters flew over from the distant sky. They seemed to have discovered that there was a change in their nest. Immediately, they let out a mournful cry and pounced toward the place where the giant egg had been smashed. When they got close to a certain distance, the net was suddenly lifted. Hundreds of soldiers raised their longbows and shot a rain of arrows. The 2 giant birds couldn't dodge in time and were immediately pierced by countless arrows. Not only did the 2 giant birds not die, but they also didn't slow down in the slightest. Instead, they became even more ferocious, and their speed increased. A pair of giant claws swooped down on top of everyone's heads. However, at this moment, dozens of sword gleams leaped into the air. Blood and internal organs poured down. A burly man who looked like a captain laughed and said, "This time, it went smoothly. We didn't let these 2 leopards escape. I don't know what route they're going to clear. These birds and beasts can't be stopped, and not long after they cleared the route, more came from elsewhere." A soldier asked curiously, I only heard about this 2 days ago. It said that as long as they clear a route, the Chamber of Commerce won't have to rely on walking to enter the mountain." The captain revealed a mysterious smile. Everyone immediately became alert and looked over. If they don't walk, are they going to fly over? Someone laughed. Hee, they really flew over. The captain's words were met with disbelief. You'll know when the time comes. In fact, he didn't know much and had only heard a few words. However, as he said this, everyone became even more curious. Chapter 1146. Father, I've shrunk again. A girl who looked 13 or 14 years old, wearing a dark blue coat and a red checkered school uniform, yelled as soon as she got out of the elevator. Her voice was full of sadness and despair. Oh, a fierce-looking bald man looked up and glanced at her before looking down at the documents in his hand. I've shrunk again. The girl shook the man's shoulders frantically, and his upper body shook so much that only a shadow could be seen. Let go, I'm dizzy. The man was naturally Rinpochian, and the girl was Honeysuckle. Look, I don't have any muscles. I've been training for so long, but they're all gone. I'm so ugly now. Honeysuckle pointed at her long legs under the red checkered skirt, threw off her coat, and revealed her arms. She then twisted her body like bodybuilders did and looked aggrieved. Rinpochian smirked and glanced at her. Indeed, he couldn't see her muscles anymore and looked like an ordinary girl. Her skin was fair, and her wool was as delicate as porcelain. She was becoming more and more like the Empress, just a little softer, One could tell that she was very intelligent from a movement of her eyebrows, and people would like her at first glance. She was in high spirits when she spoke. This was how a daughter should be. What was so good about her original muscular appearance? However, Honeysuckle had a special fondness for muscles after seeing and hearing about them since she was young. Her sense of beauty was abnormally distorted. Over the past few years, her muscles had gradually shrunk as she absorbed and transformed the blood in her womb, which terrified her. Last time, Honeysuckle said that she was leaking air. However, Rinpochian felt that it was pretty good. It's pretty good now. Rinpochian laughed. It's not good at all. It's not threatening at all. Honeysuckle grumbled. The weight of the fitness equipment here isn't enough to build muscles. The fitness equipment is for you to use, not to lift weights. You've already broken 2 treadmills, Rinpochian said expressionlessly. Oomph. Honeysuckle sat cross-legged on the sofa. Father, can I ask you something? Honeysuckle rolled her eyes. Speak. Rinpochian put down the documents in his hands. If he didn't settle this issue, he wouldn't be able to settle his affairs. What does it feel like to like someone? Honeysuckle blushed and asked shyly. Erhua, this child had always been lively and energetic, jumping up and down the roof. It was rare for him to be so bashful. However, her question caused Rinpochian to become absent-minded and silent. Father? Honeysuckle looked up. It's probably because you want to bury him under your palace, Rinpochian replied without changing his expression. Honeysuckle was terrified. What about love? Chop him up and bury him under your palace, Rinpochian said without hesitation. He looked straight at Lu Hua and asked, Do you have someone you like? I can help you bury him. No, of course not. I don't even like my father. I don't want him to be buried under the palace at all. Honeysuckle shook his head, his eyes rolling. Hee. Rinpochian let out a meaningful laugh. He was wondering if he should pay more attention to the kind of people that Erhua came into contact with at school. What a horrible laugh, Honeysuckle mumbled. Have you done your homework? Honeysuckle's face turned sorrowful again. Are you my father? I just came back. It's a gift from playing games. Rinpochian looked calm. Honeysuckle's expression suddenly changed, and she looked like she was making threatening gestures. There's one more thing. Next weekend is New Year's Day, and there's a party. Honeysuckle said, We should go back next week. Rinpochian did some calculations. But I really want to participate. I've never participated before. Honeysuckle jumped over, hugged Rinpochian's head, and shook it. It was another series of afterimages. Don't shake. I'm dizzy, Rinpochian said. Honeysuckle was getting stronger and stronger. Okay, I promise you. In that case, we have to go back today. Rinpochian was dizzy from her shaking. Thank you, Father. Honeysuckle was overjoyed. She exerted force with her legs, and half of the sofa disappeared. There's one more thing. Honeysuckle realized that she was in trouble again and quickly changed the topic. Parents and children are going to perform together at the New Year's Day party. Rinpochian's attention was indeed diverted, and he resolutely said, I'm not going. Honeysuckle suddenly burst into tears. She looked at Rinpochian bitterly and said, Other parents can take their children to the amusement park, play with them, and eat with them. Mother is now in a faraway place, and father is addicted to the brothel. I'll go. I promise you. Rinpochian shuddered after hearing what she said. After secretly interacting with Lolita, Honeysuckle became even more mischievous. Compared to the straightforward, stubborn, and tough Honeysuckle, Rinpochian preferred to see her mischievous side. However, most of the time, it was a headache. Seeing that Rinpochian had agreed, Honeysuckle hummed a song and skipped back to her room. Rinpochian shook his head slightly and continued to look at the information in his hand. 9 years ago, the first exploration spacecraft entered the node and jumped along a curve. 3 years later, a second batch of 3 exploration spacecraft, which were equipped with the best technology from various countries, was sent into the node. Until now, there had been no response. In the past 9 years, Earth had made new breakthroughs in materials and energy technology. China was already preparing to produce the third batch of exploration spacecraft, but the attitude of some Western countries was somewhat uncertain. After all, each exploration spacecraft not only required the latest technology from various countries, but also consumed a lot of resources. Many people thought that no one knew what was at the other end of the node, how long it would take to reach the other end, and whether there would be any gains. All of this was unknown. It would be fine if the probes could return, but if the probes couldn't return in a short period of time, the countries would only be paying and not reaping any benefits, and many people would have objections. Of course, in the long run, this was a must. However, the economic situation of many Western countries wasn't very good, especially some of the older countries. The high welfare of the people caused the country to be in the red all the time. Coupled with the elections and the solidification of the social classes, these countries weren't very stable. For them, what was more important was the immediate situation. Unless the exploration spacecraft sent back some information, they wouldn't be able to divert the attention of the people and internal conflicts. Otherwise, if the current situation continued to develop, there would inevitably be a war in the future. However, with him and the Empress around, this fire might not burn China in the early stages. However, no one could say for sure in the later stages. After thinking for a moment, Rinpoche made some comments on the document and put it aside. He didn't need to spend too much effort on Earth. That night, Rinpoche brought 2 flower back to Dayo. Rinpoche's initial small goal had been achieved. 2 flower had to attend school in Dayo and on Earth every week. However, she only returned to Earth once every half a month or even 20 days. As a result, she missed most of her classes on Earth. She had already been held back for many years. After all, 1 year in Dayo was equivalent to 3 years on Earth. Although 2 flower was intelligent, she didn't really like to study. She was still in the 3rd grade of primary school, but her classmates in the 1st grade were already in the 4th grade of middle school. As a result, she had to transfer schools every few months. Coupled with her special identity, she almost didn't make any friends. Only the principals and teachers of many schools in Wuji City knew a little about the situation, but they didn't know the inside story. On the contrary, this allowed the Messier 87 department to prove a previous conjecture that time on Earth and Rinpoche's region weren't the same. It felt like 1 day in the sky was equivalent to 1 year on Earth. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1147. Father, don't forget what you promised me. You have to practice with me. Back in the palace, Erhua didn't forget to remind him, afraid that he would disappear the moment she turned around. Got it. Rinpoche wanted to rest, so he agreed. With Lolita's help, the documents could be sent to Lolita first before being sent to him. With the help of artificial intelligence, it could save a lot of time. If there were no major issues, 2 days wouldn't delay anything. Since he had promised her, he would practice with her. In recent years, Erhua had learned a musical instrument with great interest. It was the drum set. Rinpoche felt that the piano, zither, and violin were better, but Erhua liked percussion music. Thinking about it, this suited her character. The drums were all custom-made with special metals and animal hides. Otherwise, a single hit from the drumstick would destroy the drum set. In a large hall, Erhua was wearing short sleeves and hot pants, while Rinpoche was playing the eru. The drum and the melodious sound of the eru extended from the hall to the outside. The guards outside the hall were all preoccupied with their thoughts. The drum and eru sounds weren't bad. Although they were a little rough, they weren't unpleasant. However, when Erhua opened her mouth, it was a little sensational. I've seen a dream that can move mountains. I hope it never ends, even if the sky falls and the earth shatters. Rinpoche looked depressed. Erhua's voice was pretty good. Although she was always lively and energetic, her voice was like a silver bell. Her singing wasn't as good as Erha's. This was probably because he had grown up. No one was perfect. December 31st, Jiaonan Primary School. At 1:30 p.m., all kinds of cars were parked at the school gate. Nowadays, there were very few ordinary people in Wuji City. Most of the people in the city were martial artists, so the economic conditions weren't bad. The ordinary primary schools here were equivalent to some expensive private colleges. The parents of the students were mostly officials, rich people, disciples of martial arts centers, and some other talented students. A black limousine slowly stopped in front of the school gate. As the door opened, a girl wearing a dark blue open-collared jacket, a white shirt, and a red and black checkered skirt alighted. Most of the students in the school wore this kind of attire. This was the current school uniform. However, this girl was still quite eye-catching. She had excellent looks, bright eyes, and a simple ponytail hanging behind her head. She looked very refreshing. What was even more noteworthy was that the temperature was close to 0 degrees Celsius, yet his legs were exposed. Even if children nowadays started to practice life force qigong or other cultivation techniques from elementary school, they were still too young and their strength was too low, so they couldn't reach the point where they were immune to cold and warmth. The other person who got out of the car looked to be in his 30s. He was bald and had a bear-like body. He had a fierce face and wore a light gray suit. He looked fierce and intimidating. Daddy, Erhua hugged Rinpochien's arm excitedly. It could be seen that she was indeed very happy. It was rare for her to act like a spoiled child. When he saw her expression, he smiled and said, "Let's go." When they saw Honeysuckle, many of the children looked fearful. They slowed down or made way for her. "What's wrong? Who is she?" A parent noticed that his child seemed to be afraid and asked in a deep voice. One had to know that most of these children would walk the path of a martial artist in the future. If they had fear at such a young age, it would be detrimental to their future cultivation. It's Ren Yuqing, Year 3, Class 1. She transferred here and beat up everyone in the school in just 3 days. A little fatty said with a look of fear on his face. He even stopped in his tracks. Year 3? All the students in the school can't beat her? Beside the little fatty was a dignified middle-aged man. He was dissatisfied when he saw his son being so timid. "We can't beat her. She's too savage. All the Year 5 students together can't beat her." The little fatty seemed to have imagined a scene, and his eyes were filled with fear. The middle-aged man's face darkened. He glanced at Rinpochian and could feel that he was an expert who seemed to be stronger than him. When he took a closer look at the girl, he was immediately shocked. This girl gave him the feeling that she was very dangerous. He was a dignified Earth-level expert, but a Year 3 girl actually made him feel dangerous? Furthermore, she gave off an even more dangerous vibe than that majestic man. The middle-aged man calculated in his heart. He didn't know Ren Yuqing's identity and had to get someone to investigate. Her surname was Run. When Erhua was on Earth, she was called Ren Yuqing. After returning to Dayo, she was called Qi Yuqing. After a few years, she had gotten used to it. Ren Baqian naturally noticed the abnormalities of the other children. He was at ease. He knew what Erhua did in school. No matter where she transferred to, the first thing she did was to beat up the school from top to bottom. She had been like this since kindergarten, and it was still the same now. It could be said that all the primary school students in Wuji City had been beaten up by her. Then, she forced others to call her father. This problem gave him a headache. He didn't know how many descendants the royal family had. Fortunately, he wasn't afraid of others finding trouble with him. If it were other children, they would have been beaten to death. "Master," a burly man cupped his fists and greeted him. Beside the burly man was a child who looked to be about the same age as Erhua. He was well-built and had sharp eyes. However, his eyes shrank when he saw Erhua. Rinpoche nodded slightly. He recalled that this burly man was a third-generation inner disciple of the martial arts center and had some impression of him. The middle-aged man's pupils shrank when he saw this scene. Although he didn't know Rinpochian, he knew this burly man. He was an expert from Dayo Martial Arts Center and was extremely ferocious. Although their strengths were similar, Erhua's combat strength was far superior to his. He was actually so respectful to that person, and that person's surname was Ren. The middle-aged man's heart skipped a beat. He immediately guessed Rinpochian's identity. However, that person should be 60 years old now, right? Or someone else. Naturally, there were many people who had the same idea as him. There were a few forces in Wuji City that couldn't be provoked, and Dayo Martial Arts Center was one of them. Those who were well-informed knew what kind of great things the master of Deo Martial Arts Center had done in the past. Rinpoche didn't care about what other people thought. Instead, he was enjoying the feeling of accompanying Hua on campus like an ordinary father. Of course, it was just a momentary feeling. Along the way, he was somewhat concerned about Hua's expression. He wanted to see if he could find out if Hua had someone she liked, and then bury him under the main hall. According to Deo's time, Hua was 8 years old. Including the time on Earth, she was about 10 years old. She definitely didn't like anyone. At most, it could be considered as having a good impression of someone her age. However, she grew up faster than other children, so some things were hard to predict. Unfortunately, Rinpoche didn't find anyone that Hua cared about. Even though there weren't many girls who greeted her, most of them were afraid of her. The whole afternoon was the New Year's Eve party. Every child and their parents would perform. In the middle was Hua. Her drum set and eru had already been sent in advance and placed aside. When Hua's drumsticks fell, everyone's expression changed. The sound of the drum seemed to be pounding on everyone's heart, making their blood surge. It was as if they heard the roar of a wild beast. Following that, the sound of the eru in Rinpoche's hand could be heard. A bear-like man sitting there holding a small eru looked somewhat comical, but the other parents didn't dare to have such thoughts. I've seen the dream that can move mountains. I hope it never ends. Even if the sky falls and the earth cracks, I've seen the miracle that just happened. My silent prayers have been answered. My broken heart has been strengthened again. The song was sung by Rinpoche. His voice was deep but full of power. After the song ended, Hua looked delighted and forcefully brought the drumsticks down. Dong! Boom! The ground, the drum set, Hua, and Rinpoche were all gone. There was only a big hole in front of the classroom, and the classroom was covered in dust. Chapter 1148. Rinpoche and Hua returned to their residence dejectedly. Both of them were fine, but a few second-year students were injured downstairs. The most unlucky one was their head teacher, who was directly hit. This caused a small disturbance. However, Honeysuckle's expression showed that he was quite happy. Although the ending wasn't perfect, attending the New Year's Eve party with her father was enough to make her happy. "Brother, are you in Wuji City?" Rinpoche asked directly after picking up the call. Rinpoche saw a trace of excitement in his serious face. With his current status, it seemed that something big had happened and that there were great benefits. "What happened? I'll be there soon. I'll tell you when I arrive," Rinpoche said. A moment later, the flying car landed on top of the building. The domestic air traffic control had never been relaxed. Except for a few departments, it was difficult to apply for air routes even if one had the money. More importantly, the procedures were troublesome. This was especially true for an important place like Wuji City. Rinpoche actually came by flying car, which showed that there was indeed something important. "Yuqing has become prettier." Rinpoche laughed as soon as he entered the house. "Let me hug you. Men and women shouldn't touch." Hua smiled faintly. "Are you trying to take advantage of me, second uncle?" Rinpoche's expression suddenly froze. Rinxia snickered behind him. "But if there is a gift..." Hua dragged her words. "Have you finished your homework?" Rinpoche glanced at her. "I'm done." Honeysuckle smiled. As for whether she had finished her homework, only she knew. "Then write it again." Hua stared at Rinpoche in disbelief and asked, "Are you my biological father?" "Yuqing, this is for you. It's the latest red badge." Rinxia took out a box. This was the latest communication device. It was red like a flame and looked like a badge. It was quite exquisite. Most importantly, this red badge was a limited edition, and there were only 999 of them in the world. The general edition was an azure badge. In addition to the color, there was also a generation difference in performance. "Thank you, Brother Rinxia." Hua smiled. "In a few years, you will look younger than Rinxia." Rinpoche sat down and laughed. Rinpoche laughed. It wasn't that he looked younger than Rinxia, but that time was different. In a few more years, Rinxia would even be older than him. This was something that could not be helped. How far has your research progressed? Rinpoche asked casually. He had heard a little about the pharmaceutical laboratories that Ren Wanyin had invested in. Rinpoche's parents were in their 90s, but they were still quite healthy. Most of this was due to the medicine that Rinpoche brought back from Dayo and the natural increase in their lifespan after attaining the Manwil level. The laboratory that Ren Wanyin invested in also had some results. Regarding the repair of mitochondrial dysfunction, there's been some progress. If I reach the Manwil level, I can extend my lifespan by 30 years. I also have a direction for a coenzyme. If I succeed, I can extend my lifespan by another 10 years. Ren Wanyin was a little proud of himself when he talked about this matter. Increasing a person's lifespan was something that countless people dreamed of, and now they were finally close to success. Good, Rinpoche praised. He didn't ask how much it cost. In any case, no matter how high the price was, the Rin family could still afford it. No matter how low the cost was, it was impossible to open it to ordinary people. Thanks to modern medical technology, the lifespan of ordinary people was about 85 to 90 years old, and Manwil experts could live up to 120 years old. Even though the birth rate wasn't high, the total population hadn't decreased. If another 40 years were added, it would be 160 years old. Unless a new habitable planet was discovered and there was no pressure on resources, it would be impossible to supply it to ordinary people. However, I'm not here for this matter this time. Ren Wanyin changed the topic with excitement in his eyes. The exploration spacecraft has returned. Rinpoche paused for a moment. A few days ago, he was still pondering about the uncertain attitude of the Western countries regarding the third exploration spacecraft. But there was news so soon. He leaned forward slightly and asked, "What did you find?" The return of the exploration spacecraft proved that the curved nodes were correct, but Ren Wanyin looked so excited that there must be a major discovery. A brand new galaxy and 2 planets with intelligent life. Ren Wanyin raised his voice and emphasized the 2 planets with intelligent life. Even now, he couldn't suppress his excitement when he said this news. Phew! Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief. Even though his roots were in Dayo, he was still excited when he heard this news. This was a real planet with intelligent life. Humans had taken a big step forward in this boundless universe. 2 planets with intelligent life represented endless new energy, new materials, and new technology. When humans arrived at those 2 planets, the development of human technology would be greatly improved. This was also very beneficial to him. New planet? Intelligent life? Can I go and take a look? Honeysuckle widened her eyes and asked with interest. Of course, but you have to wait a while. Ren Wanyin laughed. How long? Honeysuckle asked coquettishly. Not too long. 20 to 30 years should be enough. Based on Dayo's time, it was only 10 years, which wasn't considered long. Only one spaceship returned. The first one? How long will it take to get there? Rinpoche asked. It had only been 9 years since the first spacecraft entered the node. It would take at least 2 to 3 years to explore that new galaxy, which meant that it would take about 3 years for a one-way trip. The returning spacecraft is one of the second batch of 3, and it should take less than a year to jump to that galaxy. However, that node is said to distort time and space and affect electronic equipment. The records on the exploration spacecraft show that 7 years have passed in that new galaxy, but the time from entering to coming out of the node can't be calculated. I'm afraid that we will need to wait for the third batch of spacecraft to get an answer. There should be people accompanying the third batch of spacecraft. Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat. It had only been 5 years since the second batch of spacecraft set off. It seemed that the equipment had indeed been affected. The exploration spacecraft also brought back a lot of information. Ren Wanyin pressed the watch on his wrist, and an image appeared in the air. This was a galaxy larger than the solar system. There were a total of 13 planets, 2 of which were similar. One was slightly larger, and the other was slightly smaller. Blue and green areas could be seen on both of them. These must be the 2 planets with intelligent life. Between these 2 planets, there was a red satellite. There are two kinds of human-like creatures on these two planets, and they have developed a civilization. However, their level of civilization is much lower than ours and is equivalent to the level of a feudal dynasty. As images appeared, there were planets, continents, and buildings. Finally, a tall human-like creature with two horns on its head appeared in front of him. This kind of human-like creature is very strange. Ren Wanyan introduced. However, Rinpochian's eyes widened and he cried out, "Thunder Barbarian!" He subconsciously exerted force, and the sofa immediately shattered. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Remember, Scholar House. Chapter 1149. Rinpochian was dumbfounded as he looked at the human-like creature in the image. It had two horns on its head and was tall. Perhaps to highlight the characteristics of this creature, the image showed two creatures fighting with electricity flickering on their bodies. Wasn't this the Thunder Barbarian? Wasn't the Thunder Barbarian a foreign race from the 237 regions? How could there be Thunder Barbarians in a newly discovered galaxy? Ren Wanyan and Rin Xiao were surprised to see such a big reaction from Rinpochian. Both of them knew that Rinpochian had a lot of secrets. After so many years, Rinpochian didn't seem to have aged, which was enough to shock them. Ren Wanyan had also heard some things, but he had only heard a little from a few special department officials. When they realized that he wasn't clear, they kept their mouths shut. Seeing Rinpochian's reaction, both of them were a little shocked. Before Ren Wanyan could say that this human-like creature had the ability to control thunder and lightning, Rinpochian blurted out the name of the Thunder Barbarian. It was obvious that he knew this human-like creature. So this human-like creature is called the Thunder Barbarian. Ren Wanyan secretly noted it down and didn't ask any more questions. After so many years, Rinpochian hadn't told him about this, presumably because he didn't want him to know. Maybe it's called the Thunder Barbarian, or maybe something else. Rinpochian pressed a button on the table. After a while, someone came to clean up the sofa and move in a new one. Not many people would keep a spare set of furniture at home, but Rinpochian not only kept it at home, but also more than one. Rinpochian sat back on the sofa and was silent for a long time. His mind was in a mess, and he almost thought that Zixiao had been discovered. However, the other planet told him that this wasn't the world where Dayo was. There wasn't another habitable planet in that world. At such a close distance, it was impossible not to discover it if there was one. Also, the size of this planet wasn't right. According to the previous calculations of the exploration spacecraft, this planet was only half the size of Earth, and the other planet was only 20% larger than Earth. Great Xia, Dayo, and the Qin nation covered an area that was close to half of Asia. The 60,000 mountains was even larger than this and was equivalent to a large continent. There were also the 237 regions. Although he didn't know how big they were, the distance was calculated by years. According to the laboratory calculations, Zixiao was at least 10 times the size of Earth. After thinking for a long time, Rinpochian asked, "Are there also such human-like creatures on the other planet?" "No, it's something else." Ren Wanyan showed a set of pictures that were taken from top to bottom. The picture depicted a humanoid creature with 2 to 6 arms, the Bapu clan. Rinpochian knew what they were at a glance. He did not expect that there would be Thunder Barbarians and 8 Arms race in this galaxy, and they belonged to 2 different planets. The 2 planets were dominated by these 2 humanoid creatures, and they had even built their own civilizations. In Dayo, they were one of the tens of thousands of races. Previously, he had felt that it was very strange that there were myriad races there. No matter what, a world should not have given birth to so many intelligent life forms. Moreover, the population was not large, as if every life form could become an intelligent life form. But that was impossible. Based on the current situation, it was very likely that the myriad races were like these 2 races coming from the outside world. Or conversely, the 2 races in this galaxy came from Purple Cloud Earth Star. Of course, the former was more likely. What about the human race? The language was similar to China's, and there were some mythical creatures that were similar to China's. Did the humans in that world come from Earth? Or did the Chinese on Earth come from there? Or did both sides have other sources? Rinpoche knew too little, and he couldn't figure out the main points no matter how hard he tried. He put this matter to the back of his mind first. At present, the most important thing was the matter of the new galaxy and the two foreign races. Take a look at the details of those two planets. Rinpoche said, the planet where the Thunder Barbarians were located had a total of 4 continents. 3 of them were inhabited by the Thunder Barbarians, and the other one was too far away for the Thunder Barbarians to reach. There were only some wild creatures on it. The 3 continents combined weren't smaller than the continents of Asia, Africa, and Europe. However, there were very few cities, no more than 1,000, and they were scattered around like stars. Among them, there were 6 largest cities. In the cities, there were stone houses with pointed roofs and an iron needle on top. The tallest one was no more than 3 stories. Judging from the size of the cities, there were at most 1 million people. The other cities generally had tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of people. The cities were surrounded by walls that were about 20 meters high, and there was a moat outside the cities. The main means of transportation were beast carriages. One was like a giant rhinoceros that was dozens of meters long, had a colorful body, and a horn on its head. In addition, there were several types of small beast carriages. The Thunder Barbarians were more developed in terms of animal husbandry, but the agricultural area didn't seem to be large. However, there were large areas of fruit forests around each city. There were pumpkin-sized fruits on the trees, which were probably the staple food of the Thunder Barbarians. In addition to the thousands of cities, there were also a large number of villages in the wilderness. The level of civilization development was roughly equivalent to that of the Tang and Song dynasties. The population was about a few hundred million, but no more than 1 billion. Looking at the Ba-Bai people, their technological level was actually higher than that of the Thunder Barbarians. Their buildings and clothes were more exquisite, and the area they lived in was smaller than that of the Thunder Barbarians. However, the number of cities they had was double that of the Thunder Barbarians. However, Rinpoche knew that the development of these foreign races was different from that of Earth. The most important thing was individual strength. He didn't know how strong the experts on these 2 planets were. If they were like Zixiao, there would probably be existences that surpassed the Empress. If they wanted to occupy them, they would have to destroy the experts of the foreign races in the sky. If they occupied them on the ground, they would definitely be defeated by the other party. It was also very difficult to destroy the experts of the foreign races in the sky. It could be seen from the Empress's previous battles that she was extremely sensitive to danger at this stage. Unless a weapon of mass destruction like a nuclear bomb could produce considerable lethality in a large enough range, it might not be able to destroy the other party. After thinking about it, Rinpoche smiled. He was used to seeing the foreign races. His first reaction when he saw them was how to destroy them. How to deal with them would depend on the plans of the governments of each country. Are there any videos of their battles? Rinpoche asked. Yes, and 2 battles were filmed, Rinpoche replied. Both battles belonged to the Ba-Bai people. In the video, the 2 sides of the Ba-Bai people first drove huge beasts to charge into the battle formation, and then they exchanged blows. The weakest among them had 4 arms, and the generals of both sides had 6 arms. This was equivalent to the warriors of Longevity Heaven and Heaven Opening Domain. Rinpoche nodded slightly. It was exactly as he thought. These 2 videos, as well as some scattered battle scenes, were definitely the main research direction of each country. In this way, the countries might not use force from the beginning. From a human's point of view, the other party was like looking at primitive people. However, when an individual's strength reached a certain level, it could cause great trouble for Earth. He estimated that the next time they went to that galaxy, the humans would first occupy the continent without the Thunder Barbarians, then find an opportunity to contact them. After understanding the various resources of that world, they would use economic plunder. Do you think there's a way for us to impersonate them? Rinpoche suddenly asked. The Thunder Barbarians were very similar to humans, but they were taller. If they could think of a way to impersonate the Thunder Barbarians, then the Empress and the others would be much safer in that region. Impersonation? We don't even know what language they use. Their appearance is easy, but I don't know if they have any other way to identify us, Rinpoche said. It's important to try when there's a chance, Rinpoche said seriously. Well, I'll think of a way when there's a chance. First, we have to build a spacecraft and head there again. Those countries have been wavering, but I think they will be able to make up their minds this time. No country will allow itself to be excluded from the next exploration. Rinpoche laughed. How long do you think it will take? Rinpoche asked. It should be within 5 years, or even sooner. That node only reaches that galaxy? Are there any more nodes in that galaxy? According to Professor Luo Jiming's calculations, this is a whole curve with many nodes, and this node is only one of them. I'm not sure about the specifics, and I'm afraid even Professor Luo Jiming might not be fully aware of it, Ren Wanyan muttered. Rinpoche knew that Professor Luo Jiming was a true genius among geniuses. He had extremely high achievements in physics, chemistry, and mathematics, and he was not even 45 years old yet. He was one of the most famous and highly regarded scientists in the country. If there was someone in this world who was born to be a protagonist, then Luo Jiming was definitely one of them. Many people wondered if he had been reborn, transmigrated, or had some sort of cheat. Currently, the domestic aviation exploration project was mainly led by him, and the country's protection for him was equivalent to that of an important national official. Rinpoche pondered for a while and said, "If there's a chance, arrange it. I want to pay him a visit." "All right." Ren Wanyan nodded. It was very difficult for others to meet him, but he could still do it. Calm. Wonderful bookstore calm. Chapter 1150. Academician Luo. Rinpoche greeted him. He had seen photos of this person on the internet, but it was his first time seeing him in person. He had to admit that this person was a natural winner in life. It was enough for him to earn a living with his face, but he had outstanding achievements in 3 fields. Some people had already compared him to Da Vinci. 43 years old, 8 meters tall, handsome, and peaceful. Rinpoche had a good impression of him. In addition, he was quite talented in cultivation and was only 1 step away from the earthwheel level. This was because he had put most of his energy into learning and research in these 3 fields. "Mr. Run, please take a seat. I have heard of you for a long time and have admired you for a long time. It's my first time seeing you today." Luo Jiming smiled. Rinpoche was deep in thought. It seemed that Luo Jiming had something to ask him. After chatting for a while, Rinpoche asked, "In our universe, is the time in different places the same?" There was an answer to this question on the internet, but he still wanted to hear it from Luo Jiming. According to the gravitational time dilation theory, the passage of time is different in different regions of potential energy. Luo Jiming then asked, "Mr. Run, are you asking this question because of the cave and the Horned Dragon Galaxy?" "Horned Dragon Galaxy?" "Mr. Run, you may not have paid much attention to this. Now, that galaxy has been named the Horned Dragon Galaxy," Luo Jiming explained with a smile. Rinpoche nodded and asked, "Does academician Luo agree with this theory?" "It doesn't matter whether I agree or not. In fact, this is the real existence of this world, and experiments have proven it." Luo Jiming chuckled. He didn't say too much. For ordinary people, saying too much would only make them more confused. Rinpoche nodded and finally understood. Originally, he thought that Xixiao planet and the 2 races were in another world, which was why the time flow was different. Now, it seemed that he didn't understand this aspect. In other words, Xixiao planet and Earth might also be in the same universe, but they were very far apart. Then, Rinpoche asked about curves and nodes, and Luo Jiming answered them one by one. There were still some questions he wanted to ask, but they involved too many things. After thinking about it, Rinpoche gave up. Instead, it answered Luo Jiming's question about the so-called grotto heaven, which made Luo Jiming thoughtful. Rinpoche didn't hide too much and told Luo Jiming that there were also suns, moons, and stars there. This led Luo Jiming to guess that it was a different planet in the universe, just like that galaxy. On the contrary, Luo Jiming was rather interested in how Ren Baqian got through the winter. It was a pity that he couldn't divulge this information. The two of them had another meal, and it could be said that they had developed a little friendship. Perhaps they would meet again in the future. If possible, Ren Baqian really wanted to kidnap him and bring him back to Dayo. With such a person around, Dayo's progress might improve by a lot. Unfortunately, he also knew that if it was someone else, the country might be able to tolerate it. But this person in front of him, the country could not afford to lose. Another ancient tomb? How many times has this happened in the past few years? Ren Baqian was slightly stunned when he heard the news when he returned to Dayo. The 13th in 5 years. A big man from the Jing tribe said. Ren Baqian tapped his fingers on the table and laughed. A storm is brewing, and these ancient tombs are coming out at the right time. In the past 100 years, there wasn't a single ancient tomb that appeared. However, over a dozen ancient tombs had actually appeared in the past few years. No one would believe that there was nothing strange about it. However, one couldn't find any evidence for this kind of thing. The experts from thousands of years ago couldn't possibly know that they were coming, right? They also couldn't possibly know that the humans were going to fight the foreign races again, right? In the end, it could only be attributed to metaphysics and luck. Now that the humans were coming out, these ancient tombs were also appearing one after another. It had to be said that some things in this world were really difficult to explain with science. The righteous sect will still be the leader, and the commandery will send people to cooperate, Ren Baqian said. Yes. After they left, Ren Baqian thought about some things, but he still couldn't figure out the reason or mechanism. He took the next document. It was about the route from the capital to a city that was about to open. A plane would take off the day after tomorrow to set the route. In fact, there were no other planes in the sky at the moment. As long as they didn't collide, they could fly however they wanted. However, there were many ferocious beasts in the sky, and there would be many planes in the future. Therefore, the route had to be planned from the beginning. The plane that would take off the day after tomorrow would be the first test flight to plan the route to avoid any problems in the future. Your city was the last city before entering the 60,000 mountains. It wasn't considered big at first, but the inhabitants of the 60,000 mountains came out to trade for goods, which resulted in the rise of such a city. However, during the war with Great Xia and the Yun nation, there were almost no foreign caravans, and your city declined. Now that the protectorate of the south had moved to the 60,000 mountains, your city had prospered again and was much more prosperous than before. Now that your city had been expanded once, there were about 150,000 permanent residents in the city. There was a cement road leading directly to Lan City, and the railway was about to be completed in another year. With the opening of the route, it was conceivable that your city would become even more prosperous in the future, second only to the capital, Lan City, Ping City, where the protectorate of the Yun nation was located, and the former capital of the Yun nation, Wan capital. With the opening of several transportation routes, the transportation of precious goods from the 60,000 mountains would be faster in the future, and the volume of transportation would also increase. Of course, the most important thing was still to transport goods from the outside into the 60,000 mountains. Only in this way could the sphere of influence of the protectorate of the south continue to extend deep into the mountains all the way to the Wall of Two Worlds. 2 days later, Ren Baqian, Tong Jinya, and Zhu Zhua, the director of the Department of Commerce, arrived at a huge plain outside the capital. The airport had been fenced off with barbed wire. Inside, there was a small terminal, a lighthouse, and other buildings, as well as 3 airplanes parked inside. The 3 airplanes were 31 meters long, and they were the model of the Flower Eagle 13. The prototype was the C-130 Hercules from the 1950s on Earth. Even in the early 21st century, it was still the main airliner of many countries, which showed the success of this model. Due to the difference in alloy materials and performance, the 3 airplanes were 32 meters long and 2 meters tall. They flew at 700 kilometers per hour, cruised at 620 kilometers per hour, weighed 31 tons, could carry 22 tons, and had a maximum takeoff weight of 73 tons. There were 9 crew members. In addition to the pilot, co-pilot, navigation, navigator, and loading and unloading captain, there were also 4 archers who were at the advanced level of the Kismet Heaven realm. 4 sealed cabins of 1.5 square meters could be opened on the sides and rear of the airplanes. When flying at an altitude of less than 5,000 meters, these 4 people could attack from the sealed cabins. This altitude was the limit of the airplane's flight speed so that their bodies wouldn't freeze or be blown away. This was to prevent flying beasts from invading the airplane's flight path and treating them as prey or toys. After all, there were too many ferocious beasts in this world. Many large flying beasts weren't even smaller than airplanes. Fortunately, these flying beasts generally flew at an altitude of less than 4,000 meters, and most of them were even less than 2,000 meters. After the crew members greeted Rinpoche and the others, they boarded the plane one after another. In addition to them, there were 2 other students from the academy going together. As the plane started up, it streaked across the long runway, rose into the sky under the excited gazes of all the airport staff. With this thing, it will be more convenient to transport all kinds of materials in the future. Zhu sighed and then asked, "Can this thing also transport people?" Rinpoche nodded and said, "There's still too few of them, mainly in the south. Sooner or later, our flight path will cover the entire continent. Ordinary people will take this plane to travel, and most regions will only take a few hours to reach. I'm really looking forward to it." Zhu laughed. "Aren't there smaller planes? I heard that they're much more flexible and can even fight with flying beasts in the air." Tong Jinya asked curiously. "That thing is still open. The main thing is that there are no external weapons. At present, we still have to rely on bows and arrows to attack flying beasts." Rinpoche said, "There was gunpowder in this world, and Great Xia had used it before, but its performance was too poor. At present, the main direction of research wasn't on weapons. Moreover, there was a shortage of manpower, and gunpowder weapons were too weak to be of much use in future wars. Therefore, there were only 2 researchers in this area. With a small number of people, the progress was naturally slow. The reason why they were still conducting research was that Rinpoche had a glimmer of hope that they might discover something valuable during the research process. Rinpoche was looking forward to the miniaturization of electromagnetic weapons, which could pose a threat to experts. The fastest updated website on August 1. IM. Chapter 1151. This is the capital. A lady with a wide forehead and a big mouth sat behind a tractor, looking at the towering city in the distance. Her words were full of emotion. She had a wide forehead and a big mouth, but when put together, no one could find any fault with them. She was 25 or 26 years old and dressed ordinarily, but she was unforgettable. Her eyes were as bright as the stars. Beside her were a man and a woman. The man was strong, and the woman was wild. One look, and they could tell that she was an aboriginal. "I haven't been back for a long time. There weren't so many cars in the past." The man looked around. On the 10-lane road from the capital to Lan City, there were all kinds of tractors and trucks. Now, there were a few more models of tractors and trucks. In addition, he could occasionally see a large vehicle called a bus, which was full of people. There were even a few people sitting on the roof, looking at the city in the distance in amazement. "I designed the tires of this tractor," the man boasted. "If I hadn't shouldered the heavy responsibility of going to Great Xia, I would have been behind these vehicles." If he said this in another place, he would most likely be greeted with admiring gazes. However, at this moment, only the aboriginal lady beside him kicked him and shouted, "Du Laolu, are you done? How many times have you said this along the way?" Laolu has indeed contributed a lot. The changes in Dayo can't be separated from your contributions. The other lady pursed her lips and smiled elegantly. "Laolu, are you two familiar with each other?" The aboriginal lady said angrily and kicked Du Laolu again. Very familiar? In any case, we are classmates. The lady chuckled. Her eyes were shining, and she seemed to enjoy watching the two of them play around. Or rather, one of them was fighting while the other was playing around. Qingmian, are you really not going back? Du Laolu, who was used to being kicked and beaten, turned to ask the lady. Seeing this scene, the Aboriginal lady was even more furious. She gritted her teeth and made up her mind that she wouldn't let him off when they got home. The Aboriginal lady was Du Laolu's wife, Tuyu. She had followed Du Laolu to Great Xia and returned together after 4 years. The other lady was Qingmian. Qingmian shook her head slightly and chuckled. Anyway, you don't need me anymore. There's no difference if I'm here or not. I should do what I want to do. After saying those words, he raised his head and looked into the distance with a slightly disappointed expression. Who would have thought that it would end up like this? He had planned for so many years and experienced so many trials and tribulations, but he did not know what it was all for. However, this was something that they had long expected. Ever since the great Xia royal family produced a character who could split open the heaven and earth domain, they had already predicted that this day would come. Although that person was greatly restricted and couldn't go far, it was enough to stop the revolutionary army. After emptying her mind, Qing Lian focused her attention on the imperial capital that was getting closer and closer. She smiled and asked, I heard that your highness is moving the wealthy families from the 100 cities to the imperial capital. I don't know about this. I haven't been back for a few years. Du Laolu shook his head. He had always been in Great Xia and didn't know about this. As they entered the imperial capital, there were more and more pedestrians on the road, especially on both sides of the road. Even at the periphery, it was still bustling. There were all kinds of shops around the city. Large amounts of goods were unloaded here and distributed to various shops in the city. Pedestrians, laborers, peddlers, shopkeepers, haggling, clamoring, and cursing filled the air. One of the shops was used to load all kinds of vegetables and fruits. After being loaded into trucks, they were sent straight to the city. A few laborers casually nibbled on the fruits before continuing with their work. It was a lively scene. There were vendors selling roasted sweet potatoes, roasted meat, and meat soup on the roadside. Smoke was drifting out from the buildings on both sides of the road. One could smell stewed meat and all kinds of fragrances. The combination of the two smells rushed straight into the nostrils and tempted one's appetite. I'm hungry. I can finally have a good meal. Du Laolu rubbed his stomach. Is Great Xia's cuisine not as good as Dayo's? Qing Lian laughed. It's not as good as Dayo's, Du Laolu said decisively. Qing Lian smiled without saying a word. Dayo's cuisine was filled with good spices. The fragrance of the food was overwhelming, but it masked the freshness of the food itself. Great Xia's cuisine rarely used spices. Instead, it focused more on highlighting the taste of the food itself. It could only be said that everyone had their own preferences. However, when it came to meat, Dayo had all kinds of spices that could suppress the fishy smell, which was slightly better than Great Xia's. Where are you going? Are you going to see the dean first? Du Laolu asked and got kicked again. No, I'm going to walk around the city first. I'll pay a visit tomorrow. Qing Lian shook her head slightly, cupped her hands, and bade farewell to the two of them. She then jumped off the tractor. She wanted to see what the capital looked like. Naturally, she had to see it with her own eyes. Still looking? Tuyu saw that Du Laolu was still looking even after Qing Lian got off the tractor. I just feel that she's a little pitiful. Du Laolu shook his head. Even though he was a little funny, arrogant, and carefree, he wasn't completely blind. Along the way, he could naturally see that Qing Lian was disappointed from time to time. Furthermore, she had left everything behind and came to Dayo alone. It was probably not going well for her. How do you know that she's pitiful, and that it has something to do with you? Tuyu said angrily. I'm the pitiful one. How did I fall for you back then? Because I'm smart. Du Laolu grinned, revealing a set of white teeth that were even reflecting light. Uft, I'll go to the palace first. Du Laolu said as he held on his cloth bag. Go back and let them cook the meat first. Rinpoche was a little surprised to hear that Du Laolu was back. This time, he didn't receive any news from the rearguard commandery. As far as he knew, there hadn't been anything going on with the Du family recently. He didn't know if Du Laolu had found what he wanted or if he simply wanted to come back to take a look. However, he would find out when he saw Du Laolu. Lowly, after years of universal education, the national treasury is running low. I'm afraid that we will be in the red this year by 30%. What do you think? Rinpoche looked at the lowly in front of him. 3 years had passed, and the image of this artificial intelligence hadn't changed at all. Her personality was still as bad as before. At this moment, she was drawing circles on her lips with her finger, and her eyes were blurry. Fortunately, he wasn't a lolicon. Seeing that Rinpoche was asking about serious matters, the lowly winked at him and pulled down her collar. Anyway, it was just a flat screen, and it wouldn't be obvious if she didn't pull it down. If we want to enrich the national treasury, open up new sources of revenue, or reduce expenditure, the number of officials in Dayo isn't overstaffed. In fact, it could be said that there is still a huge shortage. For example, the transportation department and the commercial department are still understaffed. With the current number of soldiers, it is difficult to maintain a large area in the 60,000 mountains, so reducing expenditure isn't advisable. In that case, what we need to do is to open up new sources of revenue. If we want to open up new sources of revenue, firstly, tax, and secondly, commodities. Currently, the domestic situation is stable, and the Chuyan residence is also stable. If we raise taxes, it will definitely cause an uproar. As for commodities, the current number of craftsmen and factory personnel is barely enough, and we really can't develop new products. Moreover, even if we manage to produce 1 or 2 products, it won't be able to make up for the current deficit. I know all of this, Rinpoche said in a deep voice. However, there are still a few ways. First, we can use government bonds, which I don't think anyone will be willing to buy. Lottery tickets are not bad, but Dayo doesn't prohibit gambling. This amount of money will be collected by the casino and the people behind it, and it will be better to give it to the imperial court. Another way is the Chun Nation and Great Xia. Even though Great Xia isn't unified yet, the imperial court and the revolutionary army have already divided their territories, and it will be difficult for there to be any big changes for a period of time. Moreover, a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. After 10 years of continuous war, a large amount of wealth has gathered in the hands of a small number of people. Rinpoche was moved and asked, how do we do it? As long as we sell the goods there. The people of Great Xia have a huge demand for Dayo's goods. In the past, the borders of Dayo were unstable, so they could still restrain themselves a little. Now that the 2 countries have divided their territories and the situation has stabilized, the demand will shift to other areas. We just need to sell some of the goods that were originally supplied to the country to those who have amassed a lot of wealth. However, there is one thing that must be settled in Dayo's currency. After that, we will use paper money to purchase a lot of goods. In this way, whether it's Great Xia or the Yun Nation, we will only be creating wealth for the imperial court for a few years or decades. Rinpoche thought about it and roughly understood Lolita's thinking. The value of money was given by people, regardless of whether it was gold or silver. The value of Dayo's currency was even more obvious. Nowadays, large transactions were completely done with paper money, which could be printed as much as one wanted. However, for the stability of domestic prices, the imperial court couldn't print more paper money than it could bear. Otherwise, the country's newly formed and fragile economic system would inevitably collapse. However, if they had to use paper money to trade with the Chun Nation and Great Xia, they would first have to exchange gold and silver for paper money. This exchange rate was set by the imperial court, and they could profit from it. The same was true for the purchase of goods in the 2 countries. In this way, they would earn gold, silver, and goods, but they would only circulate paper money in their hands. They could use this method to increase the amount of money issued, which would be consumed by the 2 countries, and the imperial court would naturally gain a lot of profits. The imperial court had already benefited greatly from the increase in the amount of money issued. After a few years, the currencies of the two countries were basically controlled by Dayo. This way, they could gain a lot of profits from the two countries by manipulating the rise and fall of the currencies. If they were more ruthless, they could completely design a separate currency to be issued in the two countries to plunder resources and profits. This kind of economic plunder was faster than robbing with a knife. After a few years, it would be these two countries that would support Dayo. Of course, there were a few important points. First, the other party had to recognize this kind of currency. Second, the currency wouldn't be imitated. However, these 2 points weren't a problem for him. First of all, they might not understand the main points. Even if there were knowledgeable people who felt that something was wrong, they had to recognize Dayo's paper money under the pressure of the army, whether they were willing or not. Furthermore, Dayo's paper money was exquisitely made and easy to carry. Under strong pressure, it would probably circulate quickly between the two countries. There was no need to consider counterfeiting, as they didn't have the strength to do so. After he understood, he asked for more details. It was more or less the same as what he thought. Ren Baqian also made up his mind. First, he set a small goal. For example, 1 second. Chapter 1152. Your Highness. When Du Laolu saw Ren Baqian, he suddenly felt sad. He finally saw the dean again. To be more precise, he was finally back. Back then, the dean sent him far away with just 1 sentence. At first, he thought it was good, but after a long time, he began to miss his hometown. If he hadn't found what he was looking for this time, he didn't know how long he would have been wandering outside. You seem to have matured. Ren Baqian sighed and then looked at him strangely. Have you reached Kismet Heaven? One had to know that Du Laolu wasn't very talented. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been sent to the academy. Although reaching Kismet Heaven in his 20s wasn't considered fast, it wasn't too bad either. I fought a lot during my trip to Great Xia and broke through during one of those fights. Du Laolu was a little excited. He came back this time to show those bastards that he had also broken through to Kismet Heaven. Life and death situations help to tap one's potential. Ren Baqian sighed. With Du Laolu's poor talent, it was rare for him to reach Kismet Heaven in such a short period of time after going through many hardships. This was probably why Du Laolu looked much calmer. Du Laolu had a strange expression on his face. When Tu knocked someone down, he ran over and kicked them a few times because they were rude. After a few kicks, he inexplicably broke through. How could he have gone through life and death situations? Of course, he couldn't say this out loud. Instead, he puffed out his chest and said, although the journey was difficult, I finally achieved my goal and obtained something. I just don't know if it's the scroll that your highness needs. Bring it to me, Ren Baqian said. Du Laolu took out an ancient scroll made of animal hide, placed it on the table, and took a few steps back. Ren Baqian reached out to take it. The surface of the animal hide was extremely delicate and soft, and it felt very familiar. He flipped to the front page and saw the words, all laws are one and the same. These 10 words twisted endlessly as if they were going to jump out of the page. When he focused, he saw the words twisting out and entering his sea of knowledge. It's indeed the ancient scroll of methods. Ren Baqian closed the ancient scroll, closed his eyes, and erased the words in his sea of knowledge. There were 3 scrolls in the ancient scroll of methods. The first was the method of refining the body and the 5 elements visualization. The second scroll was the art of nourishing and cultivating the spirit. Since he had not even reached the earth embryo realm, he could only read a part of it. There should be a cultivation method for the spirit wheel realm at the back, and it should be able to open up the heaven and earth domain. Due to his lack of strength, he was unable to see what was going on, so he could only make guesses. The third scroll contained all sorts of wondrous techniques and battle techniques. Now that the third volume was in his hands, his set of techniques was finally complete. He looked down at Du Laolu, smiled, and said, you are indeed a lucky general. Without a goal, he actually managed to get his hands on the ancient scroll of methods in just 4 years. Du Laolu grinned as he accepted Rinpoche's praise. You haven't been back for many years. Go back and rest for a few days, and I will arrange something for you to do. Rinpoche smiled as he thought about where to send Du Laolu. A person with such great luck would naturally have the help of the heavens. It would be best to leave some clueless matters to him. Rinpoche couldn't make up his mind because there were too many places where he could be of use. Scientific research naturally required a certain amount of luck, and he could also be used in the search for ores and resources. There was also the map obtained from the tomb of the human emperor, where he could go out to sea to look for shipping routes. There might be unexpected gains. As for the Empress, he should be able to play a certain role if he was sent there. From the current situation, Du Laolu was just extremely lucky, but he wasn't the kind of person who could resist the heavens and earth. Sending him there wouldn't bring danger to the Empress and the others, and he might even be able to play a big role. Your Highness, Qinglian has also arrived in the capital. She probably won't return to the volunteer army, Du Laolu said before leaving. Rinpoche nodded. Currently, neither the Great Xia Imperial Court nor the volunteer army could do anything to the other. There was a practitioner in the Great Xia Imperial Court who had reached the level of opening up heaven and earth, but he was restricted by some unknown restrictions and couldn't go far. With such a person around, the volunteer army couldn't overthrow the Great Xia Imperial Court. In this way, both sides would stabilize the occupied territory, divide the land, and think of other ways in the future. For Deo, this was good news. As for Qinglian, her goal had never been to be a high official and generous salary. She had other desires. Now that both sides had divided the land, there was no point for her to stay there, so she might as well come to Deo. Rinpoche naturally understood what was going on, which was why he was happy. Qinglian could be said to be a great talent. She was shrewd, resourceful, and extremely talented in mathematics. There were a lot of positions that she could get involved in. Furthermore, based on his understanding of her, she was trustworthy and wasn't someone with ulterior motives. Now, he was in desperate need of talents, and he was naturally happy that such a talent had come to him. Rinpoche stuffed the ancient scroll into his pocket and was ready to return to his bedroom to read it properly. However, he met Xianzhe on his way back. Seeing that she seemed to have something on and couldn't speak, Rinpoche asked, "General Xianzhe, are you looking for me? I just wanted to ask if the electric shock experiment still needs to be done." Xianzhe said in a cold voice as her gaze wandered behind her glasses. Rinpoche's body stiffened slightly. It seemed that Xianzhe had asked him once a few days ago. All these years, he had also conducted several electroshock experiments on Xianzhe about once a year, and it seemed to have become a regular pattern. Seeing that Xianzhe's cold face was slightly red, her gaze wandered, and she forced herself to remain calm. Rinpoche found it funny and said, "The experiment still needs to be done. The data isn't enough, and the fluctuations are too big each time." A moment later, the two of them were in a side hall. Xianzhe put her armor and glasses aside, sat on the electric chair in a sports vest and tights, and allowed Rinpoche to connect the electrodes to her body. Without her glasses, she couldn't distinguish between a man and a woman if she was more than 2 meters tall, and she couldn't distinguish between a man and a beast if she was more than 5 meters tall. Moreover, she had worn her glasses for a long time, and taking them off suddenly made her feel extremely unsafe, making her feel uneasy. She then felt the cold touch of the electrodes on her body and knew that the prince was looking at her. There was an indescribable feeling of anticipation in her heart, which made her feel shy and a little excited at the same time. As the switch was pressed and the intensity of the electric current was increased, Xianzhe couldn't help but let out a light moan, and the surface of her skin turned rosy. 20 minutes later, Xianzhe let out a long, mellow moan that sounded like she was crying. Her muscles tightened for a moment before she slumped there without any strength. Rinpoche saw that Xianzhe's eyes were blurry and that her body was flushed. He knew that she probably wouldn't be able to recover in a short period of time. He had to admit that Exinja was extremely attractive at the moment. She was like a ripe fruit with a fragrant smell that made people want to pluck it and taste it. Such a woman made people want to conquer her. Fortunately, Rinpochian had good self-control. Most importantly, he knew that rabbits wouldn't eat the grass near their nests, especially when this grass was particularly obvious. After removing the electrodes and putting away the equipment, he said, "General Exinja, take a rest first. I'll go back and record the data." He turned around and returned to his bedroom. After Rinpochian left, Exinja heaved a long sigh of relief. Her thoughts were light as a feather, as if they could float with the wind. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1153. Rinpochian opened the ancient scroll of methods once again and looked at it with rapt attention. He saw the 10 words on the first page wriggling incessantly on the animal skin, following which the words separated from the animal skin and entered his sea of knowledge, evolving into a set of methods to deal with the enemy. Or it could be said that there were several simple uses of the divine sense. Most importantly, there was a method to temper one's divine sense. Spiritual sense spread throughout the sea of consciousness. It was the foundation of a person. If it was not condensed into a divine weapon, it would be like smoke when it left the body, uncontrollable. This technique allowed one's divine sense to form an invisible arrow before it could be condensed into a divine weapon to attack the opponent's divine sense. The second volume of the ancient scroll of methods was to nurture and refine the spirit. Nurture first, then refine. The nurturing art was naturally to strengthen the divine sense, while the refining art was to purify and condense the divine sense. This was especially so for the nurturing path, which required one to start cultivating from the earth will level. Therefore, those who cultivated this technique had a much stronger divine sense than others of the same cultivation level. Only then could they use this divine sense attack method. The method of tempering that part of the divine sense wasn't a refining technique, but a simplified version of it. When one was at the earth wheel level, it would be able to resonate with a method of condensing the shapeless arrows and produce 3 shapeless arrows. This was also the only attack method of this technique before the earth embryo. After reaching the earth embryo realm, there would be 5 more ways to attack the 5 elements. He would use his consciousness to evolve the 5 elements and leave his body. Among them, there were also the 5 words, "Eternity depends on one's heart." Only when one's heart was resolute could one achieve eternity. To put it simply, it was a firm belief. In the earth embryo realm, the 5 elements could only be evolved into one thing. Only by having a firm belief in it would one be able to concentrate and turn illusion into reality. This was all that Rinpochian could see at the moment, and he gasped in amazement. This method of turning illusions into reality, using one's divine sense to communicate with one's primordial chi and turn it into matter, was indeed miraculous. Although it was similar to condensing a divine armament, there were many more ways to do it. Furthermore, this was only the earth embryo realm. Once he attained the spirit wheel realm, it was unknown what kind of techniques he would have. If this technique was cultivated to the extreme, it was unknown whether or not it could condense a nuclear bomb. One had to know that when one reached the earth chakra level, they would visualize the 5 elements. However, what Rinpochian visualized was a universe. He didn't know what kind of changes would occur in the future. However, he seemed to have a lot of potential. Materializing a world was something he did not even dare to think about, nor was it possible. However, if he continued to cultivate, he might be able to regain his authority as a husband one day. When Rinpochian thought of this, he felt great. Just as he was about to enter visualization, he felt as if there was an additional hole in the palace. All the air was pouring into that hole. When he sensed it again, he realized that it was the palace where 2 flowers lived. As Duo Hua reached the cardinal heaven level, Rinpochian looked up at the sky and saw that it was already dark. He hurriedly left the palace and headed in the direction of the hole. "Your Highness." He saw Xin just standing in front of the palace courtyard. There was no lingering emotion on her face, and there was no change in her gaze either. It was as if nothing had happened. "Is it Erhua?" Rin Baqien asked immediately. "Yes, Princess," Xin replied. "To advance to the cardinal heaven level." Rin Baqien asked again. This was the first time he was in close contact with someone who had advanced to the cardinal heaven stage. "Princess has long reached perfection. Today, you have finally broken through that obstacle. Now, the qi and blood in your body have fused together with your vital energy, turning into blood essence. Your Highness should instruct the Imperial Kitchen to prepare more food. After all, the princess is hungry now." Rinpoche nodded and gave the order. Immediately, someone went to inform them. Duo Huan needed to prepare at least 500 kilograms of meat to replenish the qi and blood in his body for this breakthrough. Rinpoche stood in front of the palace and waited for Duo Hua to complete his breakthrough. After standing there for a while, he suddenly felt something moving under his feet. He carefully sensed it for a long time before he realized that when Duo Hua broke through to the cardinal heaven level, not only did the wind and clouds move, but the earth fetus also moved. The earth was like a living creature that breathed in and out vital energy. So this is the movement of the earth fetus. No wonder it's called the earth fetus. Rinpoche was overjoyed and laughed loudly. He originally thought that he would need to accumulate a little more, but he didn't expect it to happen so naturally now. After walking through the path of heaven, one's divine sense could communicate with the vital energy of heaven and earth, ignite the wisdom palace, and reach the spirit wheel level. He already knew about this. At this stage, one's divine sense was the main focus and was no longer the same as an ordinary person. Before reaching the path of heaven, one would first be able to feel the earth fetus move automatically. Their heart would be one with the earth and move in accordance with the earth fetus. This would be the foundation for communicating with heaven and earth. Therefore, the top level of the earth will level was also known as the earth fetus level. Rinpoche had been accumulating and using countless precious herbs. Even though he was busy with work, he still took time out every day to take a medicinal bath and visualize. Today, when Duo Hua broke through, the earth fetus moved more intensely than usual, and he could feel the location of the earth fetus. After that, Rinpoche sat cross-legged on the ground and began to visualize. The vital energy in his body suddenly condensed into a ball and moved along with the earth fetus. His qi and blood began to transform into vital energy and attach to the essence fetus pill in his body. Wisps of earth fetus entered Rinpoche's sea of knowledge and floated in the boundless universe in his sea of knowledge. A portion of the vital energy that swept toward the palace hall was diverted into Rinpoche's body. Seeing this scene, Xin was a little surprised. After looking at it for a moment, a smile appeared on her face. She turned around and asked someone to inform the Imperial Kitchen to prepare more meat. The two of them were absorbing vital energy here after breaking through. For a moment, two tornadoes, one big and one small, formed above the palace and sucked in all the air in the area. Although it was only limited to the palace, many people outside could sense it. Tong Jinya sat in his room, sensed it for a moment, and grinned. The big one is the princess, and the other is breaking through to the harmonious realm. Only Zhao Prince Consort can cause such a strange phenomenon. Zhao Prince Consort's cultivation speed isn't slow, but the princess is only 8 years old this year. Such talent is rare, and I have to prepare a generous gift for her tomorrow. Qing Lian was in the Honglu Bureau. The long centipede on her back silently leaped out and stood in front of Qing Lian, trembling slightly. "Oh, someone in the palace has broken through to the cardinal heaven level? I don't know who it is, but I heard that the princess was born with the strength of a Kismet heaven expert and is extremely talented. It must be her. I have to find out more." Qing Lian was far away, and the flying sword only sensed that someone was absorbing vital energy in that direction. She didn't expect it to be two people breaking through. However, Rinpoche was only breaking through to the harmonious realm. Although the Earth embryo realm was important, it wasn't worth too much attention. If he broke through to the spiritual level, then it would be considered a big deal. After 2 hours, the palace gradually stopped absorbing vital energy. When Erhua walked out of the palace, Rinpoche also slowly stopped. "Father." Erhua's eyes were clear and sparkling like the stars. Rinpoche stood up and smiled. "I'm borrowing your light. I'm hungry." Erhua's face twitched, and he emphasized, "I'm starving to death." A thunderous voice sounded from inside Erhua's body. "Inform the Imperial Kitchen to send the meat here. Just send it here." Rinpoche laughed. After obtaining the fighting techniques from the ancient scroll of methods, Qing Lian jumped into the bowl, and Erhua, and he had broken through. This was a happy occasion that needed to be celebrated. If the Empress was here, she would definitely be happy and congratulate them. Now that she was far away, he could only let her know through the radio. After the court session ended the next day, the important officials sent gifts to congratulate the princess on breaking through to the cardinal heaven level. Reaching the cardinal heaven level at the age of 10, and she might even be stronger than the Empress in the future, was naturally worth celebrating. Rinpoche simply waved his hand and held a banquet in the palace that night. He met Qing Lian in the afternoon. Sure enough, as expected, the Revolutionary Army and the Imperial Court of Great Xia were divided. Neither side could do anything to the other, and the situation had temporarily stabilized. Qing Lian saw that she had no hopes for fame and fortune, so she simply abandoned Su Qing and came to Dayo to study mathematics. Rinpoche originally wanted her to take up a position, but after discussing it with her, he agreed to let her teach at the Black Bamboo Academy. She would teach advanced mathematics and research mathematics at the same time. At the same time, she would be able to participate in some of the experiments and research at the academy. She was mainly in charge of mathematical calculations, which was of great use and could promote a lot of research progress. She was originally a classmate and the last transfer student to arrive, but now she had become a mathematics teacher. Naturally, this caused some trouble in the academy. In particular, Tong Lan, who had never been on good terms with her and even fought with her, almost broke her teeth from gritting them. Erhua had to stay at home for half a month to control her increased strength. With this breakthrough, Erhua's strength increased by more than 500 kilograms, and the power that she could unleash when she attacked increased several times. On the other hand, Rinpoche's strength didn't increase by much, only 100 kilograms. However, he still needed a few days to feel the pulse of the earth and stabilize his realm. Chapter 1154. On a mountain 50 kilometers away from the Wall of Two Worlds, the Empress was sitting in red. Behind her were the ferocious men from the martial arts hall, and not far in front of her were Li Fu and the others. Among them, the most eye-catching person was the one sitting cross-legged beside the Empress. He was covered in black armor, and his face couldn't be seen clearly. There was only a ball of essence and blood protecting his chest that pulsed like thunder every 2 hours. His blood was like a river that had opened the floodgates. It flowed through Decan's body with a rolling sound and then returned to his chest. It was hard to detect from afar, but it was hard to even look at this person up close. It felt like the power in this person's body was like a volcano that could erupt at any time. This was the remnant body of the human emperor. It could be used 3 times and had 70% of its power at its peak. Even 70% of the human emperor's power was far greater than longevity heavens. It could be said that he was the Empress's greatest reliance on this trip. The others didn't know that this was a remnant body, but they couldn't look at it directly when they got closer. They were secretly surprised and didn't know who this person was. "Do you mean that the news has been leaked?" The Empress raised her eyebrows and asked. 3 months ago, a foreign tribe went to the Qianggu tribe from the mountains and then left the tribe overnight to go to the outside world. Although they didn't get close, judging from their speed, they were using herdsmen. After that, the Qiangu tribe and the Earth Spirit tribe searched this area several times. We felt that something was wrong and retreated in time, so we weren't discovered by them. However, we couldn't hide the traces we left at the Wall of Two Worlds, and they already knew about it. We found an opportunity to catch a few of their hunting tribesmen. As expected, they already knew about our existence and were searching for us, Jiang Zixi said. The Qiangu tribe was the foreign tribe with a scorpion tail and a row of bone spikes on its back. The tribe that was good at domesticating beasts called themselves the Earth Spirit tribe. Li Fu, Jiang Zixi, and the others found out about this after catching people from the two tribes. The Empress's face darkened. They had spent so much effort but still couldn't seal the aura. Do you know how long it will take for the herdsmen to come after they go to inform us? Jiang Zixi said, I don't know. The outside world is boundless, and the people we caught are the juniors of the foreign tribes. They don't know the specific situation of the outside world. They only knew from the caravan that they had to travel south for half a month to leave the barren land, where there were several tribes. If we can destroy these two tribes, we can get some information from the foreign experts. Moreover, after destroying these two tribes, the Wall of Two Realms will be completely opened, and we will only need to guard two gaps. That Earth Spirit tribe had a longevity heaven expert and a ferocious beast with longevity heaven strength. In addition, there were 22 cardinal heaven-level foreign races and ferocious beasts. The Thousand Bone tribe had 3 longevity heaven experts and 13 cardinal heaven experts. The Empress said, We have moved from the human spirit experts from the barren land, Shi, worlds, from, and spirit and King Qi. As he spoke, Jiang Zixi's gaze fell on the remains of the human emperor from time to time. If this person were to take action, it would not be difficult to exterminate these two tribes. Although the spirit was he spirit, the emperor world's king, and of the god. King dynasty spirit, world's king, the dragon of spirit, star, god, thousand, and wu. They must be used to fight against the enemy, not to be wasted here. Although 2 more people had entered the heaven and earth territory, including him and Li Fu, there were 4 people. However, other than him who had reached the intermediate level, the others had only just entered the heaven and earth territory. They didn't know how long those foreign tribes had been in the longevity heaven realm, and they didn't know if there were any high-level longevity heaven experts. If they wanted to destroy the foreign tribes, it would be too dangerous, and they would suffer heavy casualties. There were only so many human elites. Every one of them was a seed and couldn't be killed easily. Now, the first thing to do was to cross the Wall of Two Worlds and cultivate for a few years. Then, some of them would enter the heaven-opening region. It would be best if they could reach the high-level longevity heaven before coming back to destroy these 2 foreign tribes. At the thought of this, the Empress told them directly. After all, except for the martial arts hall, the others belonged to the Go-Home organization and the Temple of Heaven, so it was difficult for them to make a decision. Even though the Empress was tough in the past, everyone here was an elite of the human race. They were here to fight against the foreign races. Even though she could suppress them now, there was no telling what kind of trouble they might cause in the future. The Empress was well aware of this. After hearing what the Empress said, no one objected and agreed with her. In this case, we only have 2 choices. One is to cross the Wall of Two Worlds and find a place nearby to cultivate. We will come back to replenish our food and water from time to time. The second choice is to cross the barren land and find a place to cultivate. Although we can't come back to replenish our food, there are tribes there, so we don't have to worry about resources. Tengu and Dongwusun are both good at concealing their tracks. After they go out, they can also check out the situation in the outside world and the strength of the foreign tribes. With our speed, it naturally won't take as long as half a month. If everything goes according to plan, we can reach there in 2 or 3 days at most. However, we can't stay in the outside world for too long and can't be too far away from those tribes, in case the experts of the foreign tribes come. Without us around, I'm afraid no one in the human race can stop them, Ma Hongyu said in a low voice. Ma Hongyu had already analyzed the situation clearly. Everyone was a smart person, and they analyzed the pros and cons after some consideration. After discussion, they decided to cross the barren land. Everyone immediately prepared for a day. The Empress also took advantage of this time to contact Rinpoche through the radio and told him about their decision. In the afternoon of the next day, the Empress asked some of the winged cavalry warriors and doctors to stay behind while the rest returned to Chuxia City. Even those who stayed behind had to retreat another 150 kilometers to the north. A distance of 150 kilometers in the mountains was better than flat ground, and they would be far away from the hunting areas of the two foreign tribes. At night, the Empress didn't need to borrow any strength. She took a step into the air and walked toward the top of the wall of two worlds as if she was walking on air. Everyone was surprised to see this. Li Fu didn't even have the ability to walk on air, but the Empress could. It was obvious that the Empress could beat Li Fu, who was the world's most powerful expert. The rankings in the world should change. However, at this point, no one cared about the rankings anymore. When the Empress reached the top of the wall of two worlds, she threw a thin nylon rope down from the air. Everyone borrowed the force to get to the top of the wall, put away the rope, and disappeared into the night. After walking and stopping for 2.5 days, the Empress finally saw that the scenery in front of her was no longer scorched black, and she could see a line of green on the horizon. Everyone's spirits were lifted. Finally, we are going out. I have had enough of this barren land. The most important thing was that the land of this barren land always carried traces of fire energy. When people walked on it, they would slowly absorb the fire poison into their bodies. It was as if something was stuck in their bodies, making them feel extremely uncomfortable. They needed to eliminate it first, but after a while, the fire poison would be absorbed back into their bodies again. This barren land is nearly 1,000 kilometers wide. It is said that the human emperor resisted the foreign tribes in the past. He first fought a great battle, and finally, he brazenly self-destructed. If this legend is true, I really don't know how powerful the human emperor is. Just how powerful would those foreign race experts be? Gao Yi sighed. As soon as he said this, everyone's expression changed. If someone could really achieve such great power, they could easily destroy the human race. What could the human race use to resist them? No, there must be a reason for this. You don't know the specifics, so don't think too much about it. The Empress shook her head slightly. The remnant of the human emperor could exert 70% of its original strength, and the chi and blood in its body were as vast as the sun and surging like a volcano. It was indeed amazing. However, it definitely couldn't reach the level of 1,000 kilometers of barren land. What does Emperor Qi know? Tao Qian asked curiously. You will know in the future. The Empress didn't tell them about the remnant of the human emperor's body. At present, only she, Li Yuanzhu, and Lin Dong knew about it. Along the way, everyone had to stop to rest and eliminate the fire poison because their bodies were invaded by the fire poison. Now that they could see the horizon in the distance, they perked up and finally walked out of the barren land after 2 hours. What greeted them was the vitality that was 30% more abundant than the areas they had passed through before. I didn't expect the vitality here to be so abundant. They had traveled from the 60,000 mountains to the barren land and then crossed the barren land to arrive here. The vitality in the surroundings had been increasing, making them feel like they had suddenly become rich and extremely excited. The Empress thought for a while and said, "This may not be the place with the most abundant vitality. This is still the periphery. The vitality in the depths must be more abundant." It's very likely. Everyone agreed. The vitality here is enough for us. Let's check if there are any tribes around, and then find a secret place to cultivate in seclusion, the Empress said. They were all elites of the human race who had been cultivating in places with little vitality. It was unknown how much effort they had put in to get to where they were today. Their martial arts, temperament, and self-awareness were all incomparable to those of the foreign races who had been cultivating in places with such abundant vitality. Now that they were here, they felt that the calmness in their bodies had begun to loosen. They would probably be able to make progress in a short period of time. They rested for a while and ate some food to recover their energy and blood essence. Afterward, a few experts who were good at concealment and speed went in different directions. This is a good place. If I stay here for a while, I might be able to catch up with that person, Zhu Puhua thought to herself. It wasn't that she had any thoughts about the Empress, but that she simply admired her and pursued power. Although the martial arts hall's villains obeyed the Empress's orders, they were both respectful and envious of her cultivation level. It would be best if they could catch up with her. Moreover, the people of the martial art hall were also comparing themselves with each other. The Empress sat cross-legged on the ground and took a deep breath. If she was in the capital, this breath would be like a tornado or a koan swallowing the sea. The wind and clouds within a radius of a kilometer would move. But here, it was only within a radius of a few dozen meters. What everyone wanted was the vitality in the air. Vitality was originally scarce, and breathing it in would naturally have a great impact. That was why Erhua's breakthrough was so dramatic. As a result, when Erhua was born, it caused a stir in Wuji City. It was because the vitality on Earth was inferior to that of Dayo, and Dayo was far inferior to this place. If the Triangle Star Field hadn't been discovered, the highest level of martial artists on Earth could only be at the advanced level of the Earth Wheel. Eventually, because of the lack of vitality, the Earth veins wouldn't flourish, and they wouldn't be able to reach the Earth embryo realm. Now that the Triangle Star Field had been discovered, the martial artists on Earth had a place to cultivate. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.